G'day, mate. 40 here. I want to wave the white flag, right? Waving the white flag. First of all, before the algorithm gods. So you probably think, oh, 40, you're an ascendant spiritual master. The algorithms don't bother you. You live on a different plane, right? You're at a different madriga. You're at a different spiritual level. These tawdry, worldly concerns about censorship and suppression and hate speech, they don't apply to you. They're not something that you worry about. Your mission is not of this world. And that's what I thought. But last week I was streaming live across 6 platforms, as I normally do on a Sunday morning. Live on YouTube, live on X, live on Rumble, live on Odyssey, live on Facebook, live on Kick. And within 5 minutes of last week's stream, X had automatically flagged my stream as hate speech and restricted it. And I thought, what the heck? All I was doing was giving a disinterested analysis of rhetoric around the Iran war. And only on one platform did I get flagged as hate speech. It was upsetting. It hurt my feelings. Frankly, it made me feel unsafe. It felt like a punitive and unnecessary and abusive judgment on me. But then I was able to rise above these primitive, tribal, porous instincts and recognize that I'd made some grave errors in last week's stream. Number one, I identified with America. I shouldn't be America first if I want to stream on X, right? Saying that I want America to succeed, and God forbid, I might have even said that I wanted our enemies to not succeed. God forbid, God forbid. So I'm afraid I vented and gave in to some tribal pro-American impulses. And of course, that must, for the good of society, be automatically flagged as hate speech. There's a type of identity that is privileged on the major social media platforms, and that is the educated, enlightened, buffered identity, where you don't side with your tribe or with your nation. You rise above and you speak in disinterested language. You use the rhetoric of the professional managerial class, and you don't say such crude and low things as, I want my country to win and I want our enemies to suffer. That just shows that you're primitive. That just shows that you're still clinging to your guns and your religion, bro. So let's rise above that. And then another white flag I want to wave. All right, I am leaving the normativity wars. I am leaving the wars of right and wrong. And I am simply here to discuss in an even, enlightened, educated, and disinterested manner, right, the narrative wars around the Iran war. I'm not going to identify with America. I'm not going to cheer on America. That's not the kind of primitive bloke that I am. Yeah, I've got a hero system. Yeah, I've got a subjective standard for right and wrong and for what makes me feel significant and the cause that I belong to. But on this live stream, I'm going to rise above that. Now, I got to admit, I am here under duress. It's an internal duress, but I really don't want to be here right now. Not because this is bad, but because over the past 3 weeks, I have fallen back in love with blogging. And the disinterested, circumspect development of ideas has become super exciting to me. I just want to do that every possible spare minute that I have productive cognitive power to apply. I love blogging. And I really didn't want to do this live stream. And my higher self does not want to do this live stream, but my lower self, my primitive self, the one still clinging to my guns and my religion, it has become so habituated on Sunday mornings to live stream that I'm just going to give in to this primitive impulse to share my broad provocative opinions with the tribe. But this is not where my heart lies. Right? When this stream is done, I'm going to return to the ethereal and higher realm of blogging, where I get to consider ideas and to develop them in depth and to shy away from the kind of provocative rhetoric in which I revel on this particular live stream. Boy, does Ross Douthat and his guest, Jeremy Carr, look incredibly uncomfortable in this discussion. Notice how badly, how intensely, how desperately they need to signal to the ruling class that they are good people. So the words we use are coalition tools, right? We say this is right and this is wrong, and we use certain forms of rhetoric to signal that we're good people, to signal that we are a part of a particular identity. And here we go. Listen to a chat here between two privileged but incredibly uncomfortable white dudes. The video is called Disavow. White identity is galvanizing the right. Interesting times with Ross Douthat.
You would offer a similar explanation for why you would use a term like cultural genocide. Just because that's, forbid. Again, a phrase that's associated with some pretty far-right perspectives on the world.
I'm thrilled that you asked this because I've used it twice.
I don't know if you're thrilled, but you're okay that I've asked
it's great
it.
Because
Yes, and Ross Douthat, you're thrilled because you're above such primitive tribal impulses. You're a good person. You're not like these bad people.
I can show how totally disingenuous my criticism.
So I'm waving the white flag, right? I am leaving the field of battle of what's right and wrong and the normative, and I'm going to just offer to you this analysis that there isn't one particular form of identity that is inherently, cosmically, universally, globally superior to all others. So if, God forbid, your primary identity is racial or national or tribal or religious or ethnic or professional or based on your education or your geographic location, right, I'm going to offer to you that no one form of identity, no one form of hero system is just inherently, globally, universally, for all time, cosmically superior to another identity. No matter how desperately these guys try to signal that they are not part of those with that primitive identity of just still clinging to their guns and religion. They're above that. Oh, yeah.
Is there an epidemic?
So we have the music, right? Also signaling we're good people, right? This is the equivalent of playing classical music outside a 7-Eleven to drive away unwanted persons.
Epidemic of anti-white discrimination in America?
Are you a white male who's experienced discrimination?
A man who's...
Right, he's skeptical. He's shocked. He's embarrassed. Right, he doesn't want to discuss such a tawdry topic. This reminds me of when I broke stories regarding various porn stars getting diagnosed with HIV, and the industry didn't want to talk about that. And then I put forward that Mark Wallace was likely patient zero behind an HIV epidemic, and the industry didn't want to talk about that, and the mainstream media didn't want to talk about it until I essentially forced it out there. Or when I raised on my blog in early 2007 that for about 8 months, the mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, had not been wearing his wedding ring, and the reporters who covered him were quite aware that he was not wearing his wedding ring, but they didn't want to write a story about it because it was just too primitive. It was just too down in the gutter. But then I went along and raised the issue, and then they had to confront it, and then it blew up into the biggest story in California. Or a few years ago, for about 2 years, was on my blog that Aron Tendler, the rabbi of the largest Orthodox synagogue in the San Fernando Valley, was being looked at for sexual abuse, highly credible accusations that went back to his teaching work at Eula Girls High School in the 1980s, but he was still the chief rabbi at the largest Orthodox synagogue in the San Fernando Valley. And the story was on my blog for 2 years, and nothing happened. And then I got interviews with two girls who were at high school with him with some credible details. Then that day, he resigned, and the head of the Rabbinical Council of California said, we got zero tolerance for this kind of behavior. Well, they tolerated it for decades. But when I raised the issue and provided enough credible evidence, then immediately action was taken. And Amy Klein, who was managing editor of the Jewish Journal, would complain about how I would bring up all these unsavory, scandalous topics that the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles would then be forced to cover because, doggone it, What had I done?
Says he was fired for being a white male.
What they're calling reverse discrimination.
And who is more fixated on identity politics? The left?
Identity politics has become an anchor on how the Democratic Party functions.
They believe the highest title you can have is your pronoun.
I'm white, I'm a dude, and I'm for Harris.
Or the right?
Things were a lot better back when white men were not being discriminated against.
White people were so openly attacked and denigrated.
A generation of white men have had their career prospects obliterated.
My guest this week wrote a book arguing that white Americans are in danger of becoming second-class citizens.
We can't save the country without kind of addressing this.
This is an idea with a lot of currency on the contemporary right, but it became the source of a lot of controversy when the Trump administration nominated him for a State Department job.
Your belief is that white Americans face more discrimination, at least prior to the Trump administration fixing this, than black Americans.
On average, Senator, yes, that's correct, and I'm not running away from that statement at all.
Jeremy Carl, welcome to Interesting Times.
Thanks so much for having me, Ross.
Thank you so much for being here. So you are a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute, which is a well-known, especially in the Trump era, conservative think tank. Your background, right, is in environmental policy and energy?
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
just notice all the moral signaling, the hesitancy, the oh, this is so disgusting that I have to talk about it attitude by Ross Douthat, waving the white flag before his critics in the ruling class. I don't want to talk about this. This is disgusting. I am separating myself from these disgusting tribal emotions. And then think about reality. We evolved to be heavily tribal. There are no evolutionary advantages in general to having a disinterested globalist perspective. There are no strong evolutionary reproductive advantages for seeing things from the enemy's point of view. Instead, we evolved to be tribal, and the only reason not to be tribal and to rise above our basic tribal instincts is to make a play for status, because if you then successfully make a play for status, you get more resources, which is evolutionarily adaptive. But we obviously evolved to be tribal. We evolved to be outraged when anything was going on was bad for our own group. We evolved to have a blinkered perspective on life where our tribe are the great guys and competitors, and those with interests opposed to ours are the bad guys. But notice the very uncomfortable rhetoric and conversation and emotion going on here about these basic facts of life.
I mean, my formal background is in nothing to do with any of the things for which I'm best known now, but I went and did many years of graduate study and have written books and articles on environment and energy policy and served in the Department of Interior in Trump 1.
Right. And then after Trump won, you did a kind of career pivot where you became a guy who writes about anti-white discrimination, multiculturalism, immigration. These are ideas that have a lot of currency on the right, and they've become the focus of controversy around your nomination to be Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs. Did I get that right?
You got it right.
I got it right. Okay.
It's a mouthful.
Talk about the job that you were nominated for. What would you be doing?
So it's a job that oversees basically everything that we're doing at the United Nations, but also has a supervisory role at things like the G7, the G20, the World Bank, other sorts of major international organizations that we're a part of. It really harkens back a little bit more, frankly, to an earlier portion of my career. I spent almost a decade as the right-hand man for the late Secretary of State George Shultz and did a lot of work in this field there. It was one of the reasons why when the State Department came to me and approached me that I was interested. Obviously, on issues like migration or other things, it does touch on some of the things that we're talking about here. But I think one of the sad things about the way my hearing was conducted was that I got almost nothing substantive about, like, how would you do this job, of which I had all sorts of answers. And really, it just kind of became a big, gotcha about some tweet.
How willfully naive is that? I mean, how many hearings, particularly with controversial, out of the mainstream characters, are all about how he's going to do the job? No, it's obviously going to be gotcha, and expecting anything different is just willfully naive. And it's sad in the sense that the law of gravity is sad. Right? It's just an inherent fact of life that people will use these type of hearings for point scoring to try to damage their enemies as much as possible and to strengthen their own tribe. I mean, as David Pinsoff points out, and I don't like to swear, but here it's necessary, in his great Substack, Everything is Bullshit, argument is bullshit because what we're overwhelmingly doing in argument is strengthening our own tribe and trying to hurt our enemies, and we use hyperbolic, intense, moralistic language because that's very effective for rallying your tribe and putting the enemy on the back foot. Now, I am rising above these primitive tribal instincts to make a play for status, and I am going to the best of my knowledge, optimize for truth and just analyze how the game is played rather than moralize, right? I just don't find a lot of benefit from all the moralizing going on in our political and social discourse because it makes no sense if you don't share a hero system. Right? Moralization within Orthodox Judaism, within a particular sect in Orthodox Judaism or within Christianity or within a particular type of politics, then it makes sense because then you presumably share a hero system. If you don't share a hero system, if you don't share a moral understanding about what is universally transcendently righteous and what is ignoble, then there is no benefit to be gained from discussions between people with different hero systems and each making these signals about how righteous they are and how unrighteous the enemy is.
That I'd done. And that's just, it's an unfortunately sad reality of our current politics.
So you're up for that nomination as we have this conversation.
Yeah.
You've received criticism and skepticism from some Republicans as well as from Democrats.
And he has now withdrawn his nomination because it became clear he would not pass.
Democrats, possibly by the time this airs, we will know the fate of your nomination. But we're going to talk about the arguments that have been the source of controversy. In 2024, you wrote a book called The Unprotected Class, which is about discrimination against white Americans. So tell me, in broad terms, the argument of the book.
Yeah, so the title of the book comes from the notion in civil rights law that you have protected classes, and those are basically classes of people that you can't discriminate against, and that can have to do with disability, it can have to do with race, it can have to do with gender identity, et cetera.
Are you,
in theory, whites...
Are you part of a protected class? Because if you are not part of a protected class, why would you be happy about there being classes that are protected and where any public criticism of the group is socially stigmatized while any public criticism of your group is encouraged? Why would you be thrilled about that unequal arrangement?
Actually are a protected class, and you're beginning to see under the great leadership of Harmeet Dillon, a friend of mine at the Department of Civil Rights right now, that we're actually maybe finally seeing that. But historically, functionally, it hasn't been that way. And so the argument of the book essentially is I basically look at what I think is the rise of anti-white discrimination and racism in the United States. I look at everything from the way that we talk about crime to how we look at the entertainment sort of more informally, to how we educate people, the healthcare system, and really document in each chapter by subject where
I shouldn't have been surprised by the following information, but I hadn't thought about it and hadn't written about it as I should have. I didn't realize that Rudy Giuliani, Mike Pompeo, and a whole bunch of others who are opining on the Iran war are being paid, right? They're being paid by a particular alliance that is not aligned with America's best interests or with Iran's best interests, and they're getting tens of thousands of dollars to promote something that is, frankly, anti-American and against the best interests of the people of Iran. And I never knew this, and I never thought about this. And even though I'm doing all this work on analyzing the incentive structure around the rhetoric regarding the Iran war, I hadn't thought about this particular angle, but someone has. And I love this woman. She is doing a great job. And why do I love her? And when you love a text or love an argument or love a story, it's worth asking, as Rabbi Mordechai Findley taught, why do you love this narrative? Why do you love this story? Right? We're here to discuss the narrative wars over the Iran war. Sure, there's a shooting war going on in the Middle East, but we're here to discuss the narrative war around the shooting war. And this woman, Emily Schrader, I love her. Why do I love her? Let me count the ways. But I primarily love her because we pretty much share the same hero system.
And being someone who has always cared a lot about international political issues, even when I was living in the United States, it was only natural for me to talk about this.
So she's not Iranian, but she grew up in Los Angeles. She grew up around Tehran, Angeles. And like me, she's come to love a lot of Persians.
As a professional, I started reporting on a lot of women's issues, especially in the Middle East.
Now, as a professional, it means a reporter. She doesn't have academic or military credentials, to the best of my knowledge, with regard to what she's talking about. Just like Max Boot. Max Boot has no credentials, no academic credentials, and no military credentials to be a national security fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Like, how on earth does he pull that off?
Obviously, one of the forefront issues at the forefront here is the treatment of women by the Islamic Republic. I also did a lot of coverage of Afghanistan with the Taliban and what women face there with the gender apartheid. Definitely a worse situation for the women under the Taliban, but similar in terms of the approach from the regime itself. I would say the biggest difference between the two, however, is that in Iran, you have a history of progress and modernization and stability. And also, frankly, historically speaking, Iran was colonized by Islam. Islam was not one of the countries that was originally Islamic. And so they have a very different mentality and approach. It's not an Arab country like the others. So it's a different way of thinking. I think part of the reason that there's such a solidarity between Israelis and Iranians is also because of that, because despite the fact within Iran they're not a minority, they view themselves.
So there are many advantages in life. You got to know when to wave the white flag and to recognize when a fight is not worth fighting. So I waved the white flag. I didn't talk about how much I want America to win, right? I've assumed the buffered identity of the enlightened, educated professional. And so we are now 22 minutes and 30 seconds into this live stream, and I have not been flagged for hate speech by X. Now, obviously talking about it makes it more and more likely. So that's an error. But you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. You never count your money when you're sitting at the table, because there'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done. And big picture, right, transcending these tawdry, petty, personal concerns, could we have a wonderful ABBA song like When I Kissed the Teacher today? Like, we could not have a remake of the Summer of 42 today, when a teenage boy is initiated into adulthood by a grieving widow, God forbid. I am so old. I am 59. I remember when grooming was a good thing. Grooming meant that you were raising someone right and that you were taking proper care with your appearance, right? I didn't roll out of bed looking this amazing, right? I had to groom myself to look this amazing. But now grooming is just automatically considered a bad word. But I want to rehabilitate it. Like the word gay was rehabilitated. Now it means something wonderful. So I want to do for grooming what gay rights groups did for gay. I want to rehabilitate it and say that there's good grooming, there's bad grooming. I disavow the bad grooming, but let's praise and celebrate good grooming. And there's an example. When I kissed the teacher, everybody screamed when I kissed the teacher. They must have thought they dreamed when I kissed the teacher. All my friends at school, they had never seen the teacher blush. She looked like a fool, nearly petrified because she was taken by surprise when I kissed the teacher. Couldn't quite believe her eyes when I kissed the teacher. My whole class went wild. As I held my breath, the world stood still, but then she just smiled. I was in the seventh heaven when I kissed the teacher. Disavow, but you could not make and produce and sell a song like that today. I remember when we grew up in an age of freedom, when you could sing songs like When I Kissed the Teacher and no one would automatically assume you're a bad person. Like when I was growing up in Australia, I could leave the house after brekkie, not return till lunch. I just wander around at age 6 with a tomahawk, chopping down trees in the brush, come home for lunch, eat my lunch, then wander around in the brush for another 5 hours before coming home for some tucker. And back in those days, you could celebrate kissing the teacher, right? But now it's bad. What a bad day. Now I see everything in a different light. What a mad day. I was up in the air and she taught me a lesson all right. I was in a trance. Right? The protagonist here is in the porous identity when I kissed the teacher. Suddenly I took the chance when I kissed the teacher. Leaning over me, she was trying to explain the laws of geometry because she was in her Buffett identity, and I couldn't help it. I just had to kiss the teacher. What a crazy day. All my sense had flown away because I was in the grip of the porous identity. My whole class went wild. As I held my breath, the world stood still, but then she just smiled. She shouldn't have just smiled. She should have made a federal case out of it. This is bad. Oy vey.
As a minority in the Middle East, and one that's persecuted by Islamist supremacy at that. So this is something that's missing from the equation. And then the other thing is the narrative framing, which is everything that we're in the middle of right now. All of these stories of what's happening in this war that are being told are incredibly skewed in Western media. I was just saying to actually another friend last night or the day before who is not Jewish, is not Israeli, that I've never seen the media so biased on an issue, even Israel. Like, it's even more extreme than Israel because the situation of the Iranian people forces them to be.
So when other people censor you, when the algorithm censor you, when social media censors you, when your boss censors you, when your pastor or your priest or your wife censors you, they're obviously in the wrong and they're bad. But when I censor you, it's only for your own good. It's only because I want to create a community of safety. So there's a member of this community, Kip, who keeps talking about a certain ethnic group being dirty and smelly. And when you call an entire ethnic group, racial group, or religious group dirty and smelly, I am going to censor you and block you. But it's only for your own good. It's for your safety. It is because I'm a righteous person. And it's not because I am privileging a certain type of speech or identity over another. Right? I'm just doing it for righteous reasons. When other people do the same thing, they're doing it for tawdry reasons. I'm glad we got that out of the way. I'm glad we have clarity.
To reject parts of the default thinking about how they view the world. The fact that there's 92 million people who are trying to get out from the oppression of this regime, and the lengths that they've gone to push back against that, it doesn't fit some of the narratives that we hear people on, especially the fringe left, promoting.
How exactly does the IRGC impact the U.S., Canada, Australia, the UK, people in the West in general?
I think that in the West, there's a tendency to underestimate the threat because you don't see it in front of you and you don't deal with it the same way as you might.
And I don't have an opinion on whether this Iran war was a good war for America and Israel to wage right now, or is definitely a bad war. I don't have an opinion on that. What I'm interested in is the rhetoric around the war. And I will admit that I have rooting interests on the side of the United States. I am an American citizen. I'm an American patriot. But I'll try to keep those impulses in check so that I don't trigger our algorithms from our social betters. So there was a pundit on NBC News, Garrett Ventry, for years, and he was a registered foreign agent for Qatar. Right? He collected about $1 million a year to perform public relations for the Qatari government on NBC News. And then we have Mike Pompeo and Rudy Giuliani also being paid by alliances for various components of Iran, getting paid tens of thousands of dollars. And it's rarely disclosed because the media system is not primarily selling truth or news. It sells authority and status signaling. And so cases like Garrett Ventry and Rudy Giuliani and Mike Pompeo, they are not scandals. They're just a normal part of reality and of news operations. But did you know that X was more censorious than pretty much every other social media platform at times, with all the rhetoric about, X unleashing the demons? But I'm going to admit, I was naive. I was surprised that X was far more censorious than all the other platforms. So I did an investigation, and they do have like different levels of sensitivity. So AI uses a whole bunch of machine learning, not particularly sophisticated keyword-based heuristics that scan live audio and text in real time. And it's got automated systems that flag content just based on common patterns of text, keywords, and flag and reduce distribution of content. So if you say negative things about the Iranian regime, right, X is going to censor you, or any regime. If you use a cluster of keywords that X associates with hateful conduct, even if it's ISIS or the Iranian regime or the Afghanistan regime or Hezbollah or Hamas, right? Don't be hateful towards Hamas or Hezbollah or the Iranian regime, or X is going to flag you. So X's stated enforcement philosophy is freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. And hateful conduct accounts for half of the violations on the platform. Probably after X, probably Facebook is the quickest to flag. And YouTube is becoming just increasingly open to serious, thoughtful, sophisticated discussion, such as we have on this channel. Rumble, Odyssey, and Kick are far more relaxed. Baruch Hashem.
If you lived in really any of the Middle East, not just Israel, but as we see today, Bahrain, UAE, Saudi, Kuwait, all of these countries are being actively attacked by the Islamic Republic with ballistic missiles. But beyond that, one of the things that the regime has been so good at, has been so effective at for 47 years, is the narrative warfare game. And they've been doing that on foreign soil intentionally, because the purpose of what they did in 1979 wasn't just overthrowing the Shah, it was the Islamic Revolution. And their goal is to export that revolution. This is their language that they use, exporting the revolution. That's why they have put so many professors and academics in foreign universities, how they have built partnerships with specific people. I mean, there are former regime officials who...
So I asked ChatGPT for a breakdown, and it says that social media platforms such as YouTube and Facebook and X are not primarily about speech. They're primarily about advertising, regulators, mass audiences. This drives their sensitivities. So for YouTube, the core sensitivity is advertiser safety and brand friendliness, which is why I'm not interested in getting advertising on this channel. So extremely sensitive to hate speech, identity-based hate, violent rhetoric, borderline content around war, terror, and conflict framing. And then Facebook, core sensitivity, harm reduction, liability, and global compliance. Strong enforcement on hate speech, harassment, and incitement, but more willing than YouTube to allow discussion if framed as news or commentary, and is shifting towards looser moderation and community note-style systems. So Facebook often tolerates discussion of controversial topics, but clamps down if it looks like targeting groups or escalating hostility. On X, formerly Twitter, core sensitivity is volatile and inconsistent. This is why you get flagged here often and nowhere else. So it's more permissive in some areas, less permissive in other areas, and it's hard to tell what's really going on because it's constantly changing. So same content, 6 different regimes, and only X might flag you. And they all vary in how they use AI and automated tools and human review. So X claims to be a platform for free speech, but its automated systems often triggered rapid flags and reduced reach compared to every other major platform in my experience.
Have been working as professors in American leading universities. Princeton University had Mousavian, who's a former ambassador for the Islamic Republic in Germany. And during his tenure as ambassador, there were dozens of Iranian German dissidents that were executed. And many of those dissidents executed on foreign soil, I should say, assassinated, not formally executed in the country of Iran. And this is all done through the IRGC, the networks that they've created there that start.
So my favorite sociologist these days is Stephen Turner. And I was wondering, what would he say about these various censorship regimes and which type of speech is privileged, to use elite rhetoric? And so Turner, I think, would say that what speech is privileged is based on the type of speech that institutions recognize, trust, and defend. So expertise and rationality does not have some kind of stable, objective, essential authority. So what counts as legitimate or acceptable is always socially organized, constantly changing, depends on networks, routines, shared expectations. It depends on who's got power. So platforms do not evaluate speech in a vacuum. They evaluate what fits a recognized genre of legitimate talk that advertisers are happy to support. And the educated, buffered voice fits that genre. An analytical tone, a distancing language like privileging, or I'm deeply worried, or I'm concerned about the escalation that might result from Trump's rhetoric. Avoidance of any direct moral condemnation of groups. We need to frame conflict in abstract terms. We need to talk about geopolitics, incentives, and history. And we have to constantly signal how aware we are of moral norms, even when critical of them. So this is safe speech. Now, if you're just a normal bloke, right, with a normal porous identity, and you love your country and you hate your country's enemy, then you're going to be strongly identifying with one side. You might even slip into emotional language. You might be a bitter clinger to guns, religion, tribalism, and nationalism. You might even say negative things about the enemy. God forbid, use any kind of group-based language. And if there is a leak into your rhetoric of urgency and threat framing, well, we have to throttle that kind of speech. That's obviously not rational or legitimate. We can't have any of that around here. Right? You start getting partisan. You start speaking with moral clarity about enemies. You start using wartime framing. Well, that's triggering. That's not safe. We need to retreat back to strategic analysis, risk assessment, geopolitical evaluation. We need to signal how much we wish that the violence would end in the Middle East. And why can't we just settle these disputes with a reasoned, moderated debate at the Oxford Union, using the teachings of John Rawls as our moral compass? Why can't we just do that and stop the hate and stop the fighting? No more war. War is bad.
Start with the ideological subversion, but go into something much greater. They build partnerships with criminal organizations in Europe. They build partnerships with cartels in South America. They have established and worked to establish properties. They purchased property in Venezuela. That was part of the motivation for what we saw President Trump do in Venezuela, because it was becoming such an issue. I mean, the IRGC has its tentacles in many, many countries, and beyond tentacles, they have billions of dollars that they have stolen from Iran, from sovereign Iran, and laundered through other countries. The UK is one of the primary places they do that.
So if what I read on X is correct, and I did fact check it with Gemini, apparently, while there is some unfortunate bombing going on in Tehran right now, at least they've got great air quality. And why do they have great air quality? Because the regime isn't burning up energy mining for cryptocurrency. So that's how they get access on hard dollars or hard currency. They have to do a bunch of crypto mining to transform their illicit gains from their illicit selling of oil, which is something like 60-80% of their economy. So they have to do a bunch of crypto mining, which is powered by very dirty forms of energy, right? It's not green. The most disturbing thing about this Iranian regime is it's not green. They're not using green energy. And so they're using filthy, disgusting carbon-based energy that causes massive amounts of air pollution around Tehran. And while violence is bad and bombing is bad, there is, at least apparently, if what I read is correct, there's great air quality in Tehran right now. So I'm sorry that there's violence, but on the positive side, there's great air quality because the regime isn't burning filthy carbon-based fuels to do crypto mining right now. So in the darkest of nights, there are rays of light, and we should focus on the positive, right? There's good air quality in Tehran, and there's less carbon-based pollution being emitted right now.
That The UAE is another, ironic since they're bombing it right now. But we see a little bit less of this in the United States because the United States did designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization before other countries. But
Yes, Bitcoin solves yet another problem.
Canada, this is a long-standing issue. And even beyond that, the immigration issue with Europe, the UK, Australia, and Canada in particular in relation to Iranians is extremely dangerous. We heard MP Melissa Landsman in Canada this week speaking about how dangerous Canada has become because of who they've allowed to come into the country. People who are known.
So I need to confess something. I grew up in Australia, and the general attitude in Australia was that if you weren't Australian, you were less than fully human. And then I need to confess something else. I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist in Australia, and I heard a lot of negative things about Roman Catholics in my childhood. Some things that were unfair, harsh, and frankly, even bigoted and hateful. And so I heard from a faculty member at Vanderbilt University when a Seventh-day Adventist had applied to graduate study in religion at Vanderbilt University. Faculty member had to take that Adventist aside, just let him know that any kind of anti-Catholic bigotry was not on at Vanderbilt because they were above that sort of thing. And so when I was a Seventh-day Adventist and when I was hanging out with Seventh-day Adventists, there's very little urgent, intense desire to understand the complexity of other religions. Instead, it was just these other inadequate ways of understanding life. And let's be honest, if you're a normal religious person, every other religion looks satanic from where you stand. And if you're a normal, high-commitment religious person, like, what the hell do you need with understanding the complexity of any other religion? Why would you want to understand the intricacy and the complexity of some force of Satanism in the world? And so when I was a Seventh-day Adventist, other religions were just these, entirely inadequate vessels for God, if not downright satanic. And then I convert to Orthodox Judaism, and in high-intensity, high-commitment Orthodox Judaism, there does not tend to be a great desire to understand all the intricacies and complexities of other religions. And so wherever you are, that has a profound effect on you. So there was a bloke I knew who was a good bloke, Brian Doherty. He wrote a history of the Libertarian movement in the United States, which was my favorite of his books. And we ran in the same social circles between about 2002 and 2007. We ran in social circles around Kathy Sipe and various journalists in Los Angeles, people in the Los Angeles Press Club. And Brian Doherty apparently fell to his death in the San Francisco, Sausalito area about 10 days ago. And so I started thinking and reviewing my various interactions with Brian. He was always really good to me. He was always really kind to me. And then I remember something very shameful and embarrassing. Brian Doherty, for a while, had a hot wife who worked at NPR, and she was just my type. And I think I once said something improper to Brian. I said, "Mate, your wife is fine. You're a libertarian, so you're probably a pervert. I am a conservative. My every choice is governed by God's immutable law. Your wife really belongs with me." God forbid I said that. And I didn't feel bad about it. That's the most shameful thing here. I didn't feel bad about it. I was just fine with it because at the time I said it, I was feeling strong and confident. Then come, say, 2014, and I was not feeling strong and confident. I was feeling weak, defeated, and quite vulnerable. And I made a friend request to Brian on Facebook. And then when he accepted my request, I sent him an apology for this unfortunate thing that I'd said 10 years earlier. So when I was feeling strong and confident, my shocking language didn't bother me. My provocative perspectives didn't fill me with shame. I was A-okay with them. But then when I started feeling vulnerable and weak and defeated and hopeless and just feel small in a big world, feel lost, feel helpless, then all these shocking provocative things I said just fill me with intense shame, and I start waking up at 2 a.m. and checking Facebook to see if someone's accepted my friend request or if they've unfriended me. And Brian wrote back with the most generous comment. He said, "Oh, no need to apologize. I understood you were just making a joke." I mean, what a mensch. But I will have these swings within 8 hours. I remember one evening about 2 months ago, I was just laughing at how funny it was that Trump was threatening to invade Greenland. But by the time I woke up at 5:30 a.m. the next day, I was appalled and ashamed that I found that funny, because now in the cold light of the early morning, those comments just made me feel vulnerable, and I thought people could take offense at this and then they might want to hurt me. So that was a dramatic swing. These emotional swings between no matter what I say or do, I'm invulnerable, to it's hopeless, I'll never get out of this vulnerable position, I'm small and tiny and hopeless in a big, painful, threatening world. Why did I say such provocative things? Now other people are just going to hurt me. Right? These swings were much more intense, as I understand it, before I got on my ADHD medication, but I haven't completely transcended them. But when I have a good cup of coffee, they tend to go away, right? A good cup of coffee is like a cup of optimism and strength. But when the caffeine wears off, when the manic high wears off, then I go, oy vey, why did I say that? I am so ashamed. I just needed to share that with you. Thank you for listening.
IRGC officers have been allowed into the country. Passports and citizenship has been somehow granted to many of these people and their children, their families. There also are companies that have schemes that work with the IRGC, so they will falsify documents that some of these dissidents are under threat from the regime, when in fact they are the children or relatives of actual regime officials. I mean, I got to give it to them on this. They're incredibly smart. They're incredibly smart, and they played a brilliant long-term game right under the nose of the West. And despite the fact that, you know, people like me and others have been warning about this and have been speaking about this, I mean, now it's all coming to fruition. And the reason that's so dangerous, especially right now, is because this regime is on the verge of falling, and they're kind of like a wounded animal, a wild animal. And when an animal is wounded that way, they lash out in crazy ways. And we do expect that will continue to happen until this regime is actually taken out. And we've seen exactly that in the last week. We've seen terror attacks in Belgium. We've seen synagogues targeted in Norway, where there was an attack that was thwarted. We've seen attacks in Amsterdam just a few days ago. So there are numerous things going on here, and it's not just Europe. We also see in the United States, we saw incidents in New York City with throwing an ISIS supporter, throwing a...
Now, I need to do a humble brag. When I am profiled in the mainstream media, so when I was written about by the LA Times or the New York Times or this or that publication, it bothered me that I would always be judged on the basis of mainstream media journalistic ethical standards when I was not performing in that genre. I was performing in a separate genre, a genre that sometimes consisted of reporting. So when I do reporting, I should be judged on a reporting basis. But when I am doing the equivalent of shock jock talk radio, I should be judged on that basis. But I was always being held accountable and found deficient with regard to a genre that I was not primarily working in. So I don't like these category errors and genre errors when they diminish my status and how amazing and wonderful I am. And I don't like these category errors when it comes to trying to understand the world, right? Ben Shapiro tries to make the most conservative case possible, talking very rapidly and speaking to an audience who wants to hear that. And so he is a conservative activist who talks very quickly, and so he should be evaluated on that basis. And someone who is an academic specializing in Romanian literature should be evaluated on that basis, and accountants shouldn't be condemned because they're not as funny as a professional stand-up comic, and a professional stand-up comic should not be condemned because their accounting work is not as good as that as a certified public accountant. And so when you're playing a game of football, right, it doesn't make much sense to have someone calling you out for fault, right? You don't negatively judge people playing football because they are not living up to the standards of tennis, right? You don't try to flag people for committing infractions in a match of golf because they're not abiding by the standards of cricket. So get your categories right, get your genres right, and identify people in their particular genre. And most of all, what's most important is don't make genre errors with me, particularly if they make me look bad.
An IED at a crowd of people in a protest. We saw a attack in Austin, Texas, where someone was wearing a shirt. I believe it said "Property of Allah," and under that he had another shirt with the flag of the.
And good question. Any thoughts on Mark Halperin brazenly eating and slurping sodas from large bottles on air? So people are a package deal. It is not ideal. And I remember when I have done it, I would be dressed down for it. And so I do it much less because I didn't like being humiliated. So it's not ideal, but people are a package deal. And Mark Halperin often provides very high-quality analysis. And so if he needs that kind of fuel to provide the high-quality analysis, then I'm going to rise above any kind of petty criticisms. I'm just going to value and love the good things that he does. I'm going to understand he's part of a package deal, and I am going to forgive and overlook the brazen eating and slurping on a live stream. Not great. I disavow, but I'm super empathic. That's what people say about me. Like 40, like for all his flaws, like he's a master of empathy. And few people in the entire world know more about Carg Island than 40.
Started a new wave of airstrikes against this Iran-backed organization in Lebanon. Shannon?
Trey Yingst for us overseas. Thank you, Trey. As military operations continue, we want to look at the significance of the most recent strikes and what might be next as President Trump weighs his options. Joining me now, retired Lieutenant General Charlie Moore. Good to have you back with us.
Thank you, Shannon.
Okay, so this is a look at some of the recent attacks the U.S. and Israel has been carrying out, and the president with a new threat saying, listen, we're going to start going after power plants that are very important for Iran if they don't reopen the strait. He says that may be coming as soon as Monday.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting development. I mean, what this basically exhibits is that this is starting to escalate a little bit in terms of the types of targets that we're going to be willing to go after inside of Iran to basically hopefully bring an end to the conflict.
So let's go to our next map here. This is looking at the range of missiles. We know that Iran tried to strike Diego Garcia, where we've got a joint base with the UK there, but that's outside.
Okay, let's get back to category errors, and let me make a play for status here. So the category error in a philosophy, as Gilbert Ryle describes it, names the mistake of placing a concept in the wrong logical type. And his famous example is the visitor to Oxford, who after seeing the colleges and the libraries and the playing fields asked where the university is. Now this poor man, he's seen all the pieces, but he cannot find the whole because he expects something else. Now, these category errors are not always the result of naivete. Sometimes when the legacy media, for example, applies its own standards to a humble vlogger such as myself, or to other people who write blogs, something beyond confusion is at work. Right? Sometimes the mainstream media wants to frame bloggers as failed journalists. I have a friend who's a screenwriter who prefers to frame journalists as failed screenwriters. And different professions want to keep their privileges, and journalists want to keep their monopoly on what constitutes legitimate public knowledge. They got a rule book. It's not neutral. It's territorial. So I notice many journos who have developed expertise in a particular field look askance at someone challenging their expertise in a field. People are territorial and tribal. People want to define what constitutes legitimacy, morality, knowledge, hierarchy. People who get to define the narrative, define the hierarchy. They decide who should be trusted, who gets the money, attention, and authority. So this is why these genre disputes carry such a moralized charge, because they reduce my status, and I don't like that. They put themselves forward as arguments about quality and safety, but they're really fights about power. So academics will dismiss independent thinkers for lacking academic credentials that only matter inside the academic genre. Regulators dismiss innovators for lacking the proper compliance structure that only makes sense in some legacy industry. So every group tries to pull other groups into its own field. And you know the rules in your field, you control the score. It's aggression. It's a microaggression. It's a macroaggression. It's a move, right? Correct the genre and people get clarity and understanding. The blogger is not necessarily a failed journalist or a failed screenwriter. He might be part of a tradition that stretches from Montaigne to Hazlitt to our best op-ed writers. He might be a conversationalist. He might be doing what good long-form journalism has always done. He might be thinking out loud with people who are knowledgeable and seeing where it goes, right? He's not a failed peer-reviewed academic. Right? Different genres have their own virtues, their own failures, their own internal logic. Right? Apply the right genre and questions improve. Is this blogger insightful and honest within the particular genre of blogging? Is the journalist accurate and fair within the genre of journalism? Is this podcaster adding value in that particular genre? Political arguments go nowhere when one side is arguing morality and the other side is simply trying to describe reality. Right? One person may treat politics as a technocratic problem to be solved. The other treats it as a moral drama, a struggle over identity and belonging, where winning requires some kind of visible commitment. Each side judges the other by its own genre and concludes the other side is stupid or corrupt, and neither conclusion is correct. So we're living through a genre explosion right now. It is just popping up, exploding, ejaculating everywhere. Substack, YouTube, TikTok, podcasts, private group chats, long-form video essays, X threads. Right? Each genre has its own norms, its own logic, its own internal criteria for success. And older institutions respond by trying to drag all of these new genres into their own familiar categories where they excel. Because familiar categories preserve familiar authority. So we see misdiagnosis everywhere, bad faith accusations. We see the elites trying to preserve their power. Once you have power, you want to restrict speech as much as possible because wide open speech is likely to challenge and embarrass you. So here's the correction. Ask what game someone is playing. Don't ask when you see someone playing a game, oh, how is this game deficient when compared to the game that I'm playing? Don't ask, oh, what game confers privilege and authority and prestige and status to me and reduces status and privilege and authority to this other person. Just ask, what game is someone playing? Right? Put someone in their proper genre. You're halfway there to understanding them. And thus ends my public service announcement.
The range that a lot of people believed or assessed to this point that they had. When you start to look at this range, you look at European capitals and others. The whole point was trying to go after their missile program, so it didn't expand. But what does this tell you, this attempt on Diego Garcia?
Yeah, so this was a bit of surprise to some. Some people feared that this is exactly the type of capability that Iran had developed. But if you look at the range from Iran to Diego Garcia, this is 2,400 nautical miles. This is about double the range that most people believed that they were capable of achieving. It not only brings Diego Garcia into the mix for a place that they could potentially try to strike, but as you indicated, all of Western Europe, our bases, our personnel there, it also sends a message to the leaders of our allies there that they may be in Iran's crosshairs as well. This isn't just limited to the Middle East.
And one of the issues was when we were in diplomatic conversations with them is that they said they wouldn't negotiate at all over the missiles. It was going to be just about the nuclear program. So now we can assess that they may have better capabilities than a lot of people thought. Okay, so let's get to the next slide here, because this is where Iran has been targeting energy infrastructure.
So over 20 years ago, I read a lively blog post, and became intrigued because it was written by a woman. And I immediately wondered, is she hot? So one of my essential criteria for understanding whether something is wise and profound and true is to get a picture of the person who wrote it and then decide how much worth they have and how deeply I should consider their arguments. So I looked up the author of this piece, and she was hot. So I wrote to her about how much I liked her piece, and we got a conversation going, and then I met her for coffee, then I took her for a walk on the beach, and then I kissed her. And she was the hottest girlfriend I've ever had. And but as my feelings grew more intense for her, I started to really hate her writing. So when I was not emotionally attached to her, I could just appreciate what was good in her writing, and no big deal, just let it go. But the more intense I felt about her, then I couldn't distance myself from any failings in her writing, and I had to stop reading her because it would bother me. And it also would bother me because my female friends hated her because they experienced their brain slowing down when they were around her. And their hatred for her was not entirely based on cognitive criteria. They hated her because she was hot and she had a look that said, you can do anything to me. And every male friend I had who was around her tried to have relations with her, which is bad. You shouldn't try to hook up with your friend's girlfriend. And there's a wider point. So I have dated women who were actresses in a particular genre that receives a great deal of stigma. And initially, the honeymoon phase of our relationship would be wonderful. And my friends would like her because she was articulate and she was lovely and she wasn't presumptuous, and they liked her even though she had a background as an actress in a particularly stigmatized genre. And initially, I was fine that she had chosen to allow herself to be captured on video in a stigmatized genre. But then, as I started doing intimate things with her, I developed intimate feelings. As I developed intimate feelings, I was no longer able to disengage from her performance in her prior body of work. And then I'd get all sorts of negative feelings and even horror. And so there's a broader lesson here, and here's my life lesson. Some people are fine at a remove, and once things get too intense, right, there may be more downsides than upsides. So I used to be a devoted follower, but there's a problem when you become a devoted follower. People quickly realize that they can use that to hurt you, and they will then go to whoever you venerate and follow and say, did you realize this about Luke? Because the way the world works is on the basis of group strategy. And so if people don't like you, they will try to hurt your friends and bother your friends. And so I have to distance myself from many people who I'd otherwise prefer to follow so that I can maintain a maximum of freedom. For example, in Orthodox Judaism, it is traditional and normal and healthy to have a Rav, to have one rabbi who you turn to for halakhic guidance over how you should live and how you should observe Jewish law. But if I were to have one rabbi, to have a Rav to whom I consistently turn to for advice, and then that information became public, right, it would just shut down my public speech, because then anytime anyone had a problem with what I was saying or blogging, they'd then call up my rabbi, and it would become such a burden to him that no matter how saintly he was, he would have to capitulate, and I would either have to lose that relationship with my Rav, or I'd essentially have to check out of doing anything edgy in my blogging and vlogging. So I've learned the power of having more distant relations instead of intense relations. And there are some people, if I talk to them regularly, I find it draining. But if I only talk to them once a month, it's great. Right? If I come to them on certain topics, then it's a good experience. But if the conversation moves to other topics, it's an energy depleter. So I've learned to dial people up and down in my life, dial them up and down on the basis of intensity, the length of our interactions, the proximity, is it in person or over the phone? There's one more category that, trust me, I learned to dial people up and down on, and now I'm blanking on it. So here's my latest example. I discovered during, I think, last year's Iran war, the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, where the U.S. came in and built some Iranian nuclear facilities, I discovered the virtues of a YouTube channel called The Enforcer. And I appreciated the way that they covered the war live, and I thought, this is great. And now, whenever I listen, all I can do is like hate on them. I hate the hyperbolic nature of their titles. So they'll use a title. The United States destroys Hog Island. The United States did not destroy Hog Island. It took out some military facilities on Hog Island. So I hate their hyperbolic language. I hate their presumptuous, sweeping condemnations. Like, they love going off on Israel. Israel was obviously wrong to do this, and this is just going to create massive problems for the United States. And now America must withdraw from any alliance with Israel. So I hate their sweeping moral condemnations, not just because they're hostile to the Jewish state, but because I think they're often ill-informed, and I don't tune into them for their moralization. I don't need their instructing me on what is moral, because I don't share a hero system with them. And I just don't like their hyperbolic denunciations, such as, oh, how stupid is it that the United States has withdrawn sanctions from Russian oil and Iranian oil? Whoever heard of like trading with the enemy during a time of war? Well, guess what? From time immemorial, enemies at war have traded with each other. It's not shocking. It's not surprising. I don't need your stupid, hyperbolic, ignorant denunciations of withdrawing sanctions on Iranian or Russian oil. Instead, you should stick to what you're good at, simply describing what's going on. I don't need your moralized genre. Instead, explain why the Trump administration may have done such a move, and what are the upsides to the move, what are the downsides. I don't need your grand sweeping, hyperbolic denunciations. So I'm increasingly finding myself just fast-forwarding through the enforcer to get away from their ill-informed, moralistic narratives and just try to get some fair dinkum information. Bro, I'm a truth optimizer. I don't need your ill-informed moral narratives.
Islamic Republic on it. So a supporter taking action there, whether associated formally or not. This is part of the problem of the Islamic Republic of Iran, is that it's not just one leader. It's not even just one entity, the IRGC. It's an entire system. It's an ideology, Khomeinism, that overthrew the Shah in 1979. It's that ideology that they've been exporting onto foreign soil, and how they've been able to build up cells of radicals in some of these countries that are willing to carry out some of these, to your average person, insane actions against average people who have nothing to do with what's happening in a conflict thousands of miles away. And the most prominent example that comes to mind right now is the terror attack in Michigan that happened against the Temple Israel Synagogue, in which a man, a Lebanese American, had family members who were Hezbollah, at least in one case, a Hezbollah commander, died as a result of Israeli airstrikes. And apparently he went after that to go kill children, American Jewish children.
So some people say that X has turned into a cesspool. I'm very judicious about the accounts that I follow. And so my experience of X is not that of a cesspool. But I am not here to diminish your lived experience. I respect your lived experience. And if you find X a cesspool, then I will morally instruct you from up here, speaking down to you down there, that you should be more judicious about who you follow on X and how you use the platform. Right? X control. That's what we need. But there was a funny exchange on X over the weekend. Piers Morgan wrote, so not only has Iran brazenly lied about its ballistic missile range capacity, I'm shocked that Iran lied. But this means it can probably hit the UK with them. And we have zero defense against these missiles. Very worrying. So you notice in elite discourse, many things are very worrying. Our ruling class is always very worried about this and deeply concerned about that because they are so super moral. Georgetown law professor Randy Barnett responds, don't worry, Piers. It's against international law for Iran to fire these missiles at you. The same international law that says you can't preempt the threat. So breathe easy, Piers. Thank God international law prohibits Iran from firing missiles at other nations such as Great Britain or France or Germany or Portugal or Spain or Turkey. Isn't that a relief? Guys, you're protected by international law. Is there any more robust protection than international law? I mean, there's nothing like international law to stop a missile. I mean, the force field of international law to just stop missiles, right? Better than Patriot missiles, better than any type of rocket defense, right? International law. That's going to restrain the chaos and the wildness and the dangers of life. So sometimes the essence of politics is not rule following and the law, but are we in an emergency? Are we in a state of exception? Has the sovereign decided that we're in a state of exception and then the rest of the regime is following along? When you're in a dangerous, chaotic, wild situation, law without armed enforcement is not going to settle things down.
The Temple Israel Synagogue, who were in the preschool or the whatever the school was there, and he only didn't succeed because the security guard was able to successfully stop him. And it's just another example of how this radicalized rhetoric has been successful.
Bob Altberger, once again, I see that you are smarter, wiser, more clear, and morally superior to me. I didn't think about this. I didn't realize there was this option. How ignorant am I? I have lived an inferior life. Bob Altberger points out, whenever my X feed becomes too degenerate, right, and there's just the appropriate amount of degeneracy. And if you like more degeneracy in your X feed than I do, you're a bad person. And if you prefer less degeneracy in your X field than me, you're a prig. You're a stuck-up, pompous, blowhard idiot, right? Only I have the perfect amount, the right amount, the righteous amount of degeneracy in my field. But Bob points out, whenever my X feed becomes too degenerate, I aggressively click. I'm not interested in this post. I forgot about this. I have not taken advantage of this. Or I straight out mute the worst offenders. Doesn't take much for the algo to take the hint. Good on you, mate. Good on you. Fair go. Right. Good on you. I admire that. You're a practical man. You're a wise man. You are a shining example of how we should conduct ourselves online. You've got a very tight online game. No homo. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Has been successful in integrating itself in Western society, and that's a very, very scary place to be. And it makes the threat more relevant to everybody, and it also makes it harder to tackle. It also makes it harder and more painful to tackle because there's many different elements to this conflict. It's not as simple as taking out Maduro in Venezuela. It's a lot greater than that. It's the entire system, both inside and outside the Islamic Republic.
How do you mean? What's the system?
Now, I wish that the interviewer spoke up a little more loudly or just adjusted her audio settings, but I love the way that she's conducting this interview. She makes her questions very short. The guest is wonderful. Don't get in the way. Don't muck things up. We don't need the interviewer's moralization. Just make it short and sweet, just like my girlfriend's.
The system that rules the Islamic Republic internally is in English called the guardianship of the Islamic jurist. That's the overarching ideology that guides the decisions of the Islamic Republic. Everything circles back to the decision and guidance, the guardianship of the Ayatollah, of the supreme leader. If you look at the structure of the state, every government body ultimately goes back to his decision. Every candidate for office ultimately goes back.
So you can call me Young Luke. I don't mind. You want to call me Young Luke? You can call me Young Luke. That's the kind of open-minded, man of the people, unpretentious bloke that I am. But if you want to call me Supreme Leader, right, I'll still answer to that. But I will not make halakhic decisions for you unless I know you, unless you're a member of this YouTube channel.
Back to who the IRGC pre-approves. That's why it's so ridiculous when you discuss the presidential election that took place not long ago. People were saying, oh, well, will it be Pezeshkian or will it be Jalali, the other more extreme, more hardliner candidate? And it ended up being...
I was waking up at 2 a.m. with those exact thoughts. It's uncanny how this beautiful woman, beautiful, intelligent woman with my hero system is able to read my mind. Now, I recognize that you're primarily tuning into this live stream for the latest of my military and Middle East and Iranian expertise and how is the war going. And good news, here's the score. Airpower won the first phase. The hard phase just started. The expert story on the 2026 Iranian war has not flipped, it has hardened. 3 weeks in, and the facts are clear. The U.S. and Israel have air dominance. They have degraded Iran's missiles, air defenses, and naval forces. They have killed the supreme leader. And yet the regime is still in power. That tension defines the war. Before the war, most analysts warned that bombing Iran would be risky. They expected escalation, economic shock, and no clean solution. They saw Iran as weakened but not fragile. Now the evidence is in. The opening phase worked. The strikes hit hard. Iran lost assets, leadership, and freedom of movement. But it did not collapse. It adapted. It has shifted to attrition. It fires missiles at bases and Gulf targets. It leans on proxies. The IRGC disperses into smaller, harder-to-target units. The fight continues. The core judgment has not changed. War can destroy, cannot automatically produce a stable outcome. The regime is wounded but intact. A collapse could trigger a civil war. Successor junta could be more aggressive, not less. The risks analysts flagged before the war are now showing up in real time. The battlefield picture is one-sided. The strategic picture is not. The conflict is shifting from a campaign of destruction to a test of political will. Strait of Hormuz disruption is pushing costs into the global economy. Refugee flows are building. External actors like China are watching for leverage. This is not a reversal in expert opinion. It is a confirmation under pressure. The strikes succeeded tactically, but the endgame is still unclear. Here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God.
Being Pezeshkian, but it's so funny to hear people speak about this in the Western media because they don't understand that, like, that's not a real election. They had, like, a tiny, tiny turnout. In fact, the regime actually lied about how many people came out to vote, and they threatened Iranians who refused to vote because the biggest campaign of that election internally was Iranian citizens saying, I'm not voting as a matter of principle. Because democracy isn't respected there. It's bogus. I mean, whoever was advantageous for the regime itself to put in the position of president at that time was Pezeshkian. Why? Because Pezeshkian is from one of the two primary camps that exist inside Iran today. One is the reformist camp and one is the hardliner camp. Now, the now deceased Ayatollah Khamenei is obviously from the hardliner camp. So is his son.
I love how she says Khamenei. Khamenei. It's exquisite. I love it. I only want to say Khamenei. Now, we have arrived at your favorite moment of the show, where I play just the briefest of excerpts from the New York Times.
The billionaire funding France's far right. This article is by Catherine Porter and read by an automated voice. As France elects thousands of mayors this Sunday, one of the most influential players is not on the ballot.
So I want you to guess where I'm going to stop this, and I want you to guess what grabs my attention.
His name is Pierre-Édouard Stérin. He is a billionaire entrepreneur who left France 14 years ago to pay less tax, but has since spent millions, he said in an interview, to ensure France doesn't disappear. Inspired, he said, by George Soros' support for liberal causes, Mr. Stérin has steered money to right-wing think tanks, political training programs, social media influencers, and non-profit groups to shape the country according to his beliefs: anti-immigrant, free market, less Islamic, and more Catholic. One program...
Man, this guy's a patriot. We need more right-wingers trying to do the equivalent of what George Soros does for the left.
Funded by Mr. Stérin, has, by his count, trained at least 4,000 right-wing candidates in the municipal elections, with the far-right National Rally Party projected to potentially win the presidency next year. Mr. Stérin is striving to accelerate France's rightward shift. I dream of a France that is once again economically powerful, and a France that rediscovers a sense of values, that embraces its Christian roots, Mr. Stérin, 52, said. The France of Mr. Stérin's dreams would be more capitalistic, socially conservative, and Trumpian, and to his critics, racist.
Right, this is the type of France that I would love. I won't go on and on with that exciting automated voice, but here's the surprising part of this article. He says the quiet part out loud. He wants to be canonized as a saint. Now, we all want to be canonized essentially as a saint, but almost none of us would have the balls to say it out loud, right? The unwritten rule of the hero system is you don't say that you want to be canonized as heroic. Remember the central teachings of Ernest Becker in his great book, The Denial of Death, that we cannot tolerate knowledge of our own lack of importance. It's not mortality that frightens us. It is that we will have lived and died and nothing much has changed. So we have to construct hero systems to give heroism to our ordinary choices. And our hero systems always disguise themselves, right? We think that we only want what is true and beautiful and virtuous, but what we really want is to be part of something transcendent. And this guy doesn't hide his hero system. He says he wants to be canonized. He's literal. He wants to be a saint. He's organized his entire adult life, his philanthropy, his politics, his asceticism on budget airlines and desk sandwiches, all around one single coherent project. He wants to become a saint. For him, Roman Catholicism is not a faith of the heart. It is a rational and mathematical framing. It's a framework. He is building a scoreboard he can win. So most people run one hero system at a time. This guy runs three simultaneously. He wants religious sainthood, capitalist success, and political transformation. And he's giving away almost all his wealth, or plans to, in that pursuit. Now, hero systems are not just private and individualist. They also require a community that recognizes your hero system. If nobody recognizes your hero system, it's not going to work for you. And so this is where we need niche construction. Niche construction is a process by which every living organism doesn't just adapt to its environment, but actively reshapes its niche, its environment, to improve its own fitness. Right? Beavers don't evolve to suit the river. Beavers build dams and change the river to suit their own interests. Right? The constructed environment then feeds back on the constructor, selecting for traits that fit the new niche. So this bloke, Stérin, he's not just performing heroic acts within an existing environment. He is rebuilding, reshaping the niche, the environment, so that his acts read as heroic within his reshaped environment. Right? The Catholic resurgence he funds, the right-wing candidates he trains, the cultural institutions he shapes, they're not incidental to his personal hero project. They are essential to it. He needs France to change so that he can become more widely acclaimed as heroic. This is beautiful. I love it.
It would tolerate little immigration, particularly from Muslim countries that France colonized. Undocumented immigrants who commit crimes or do not work would be deported. Muslim dress would be banned in public, and halal food no longer served in schools. I am even further to the right than the far right on immigration, said Mr. Stérin, who also considers the National Rally's economic program too statist. Mr. Stérin wants to ban abortion, access to which was enshrined 2 years ago.
Another piece in the New York Times today, the courts cannot save us from Trump. We have a guest essay here from Duncan Hosey, a legal scholar at the Stanford Constitutional Law Center.
The courts cannot save us from Trump. This article is by Duncan Hosey and read by an automated voice. The sheer number of brazenly unconstitutional actions undertaken by the Trump administration this term has left the legal world dizzy. Each day seems to bring fresh depredations. The investigations and prosecutions of President Trump's political opponents, the lawsuits against media organizations whose coverage he dislikes, the attempt to end automatic birthright citizenship for children born in the United States. For those who care about the rule of law, there is an understandable impulse to feverishly track the fate of these actions in court, tallying losses and wins, parsing judicial opinions, searching for signs of effective opposition from a...
So, he says the courts cannot save us. What can save us? recognizing we're in a state of emergency. So remember, after Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, he says the election was stolen, and then all those who sided with him and who also sided with the idea that the election was stolen, they were then morally free to do anything you want. And so this author from Stanford Law, he is propounding the same doctrine of emergency, because if he's right, we're in a state of emergency and the courts cannot save us. What can save us? Us recognizing that we're in a state of emergency where there are zero moral constraints. Because once you claim we're in a state of emergency, that the rules and the laws cannot save us, then you're free to do anything. Nothing is illicit.
Besieged legal order. But that impulse is largely misplaced. As necessary as the courts are in this fight, they are far from sufficient against a figure like Mr. Trump, who refuses to honor the conventions and commitments of constitutional law.
So he is making the mirror image argument that Trump and Trumpists made following the 2020 election, that the power has rigged things and therefore we don't have to respect power. We're in a state of emergency and all things illicit to fight the bad guys. So this Stanford scholar uses a story from Oliver Wendell Holmes, who I think was a Supreme Court justice, who says that the bad man asks not what is right, but what happens if he disobeys. Guess what? Everyone asks the same question. Something is practically wrong and bad for your evolutionary reproductive success only if it is actively enforced. Otherwise, it's not practically wrong for you. Now, the scholar argues that the practice of law requires trust in the system. Well, so does pretty much everything. Marriage, the economy, all require a certain level of trust in the system. So he diagnoses the crisis that we're in as an erosion of moral norms. And then he is unleashing an erosion of moral norms by saying essentially that the only practical response to an erosion of moral norms is to forget about moral norms in opposition to moral norms. So he identifies the erosion of moral norms as the disease and then recommends more erosion of moral norms as the cure. And he doesn't notice the tension because it just feels so righteous from where he stands, right? Righteousness and coherence are not the same thing. So we need some Carl Schmitt here, who says that in many parts of politics, the fundamental distinction is between friend and enemy, not between good and evil, not between legal and illegal, not between constitutional and unconstitutional, between friend and enemy. So if you're in an emergency state of exception, the law, if it is not backed up by armed force, is unlikely to save you.
Placing too much faith in the courts in this moment mistakes litigation for resistance. It risks obscuring the greater importance of the political battlefields.
So this scholar is arguing that Trump is bad, he's a bad man, and he's ignoring constitutional norms, right? This is a highly moralized description of something much more ordinary. Now, why are there such great intense incentives to make all these intense, over-the-top, hyperbolic moral proclamations? Because they're very effective at rallying your side and demeaning and diminishing the enemy. So Trump is claiming sovereign power in the Schmittian sense. He decides that we're in a state of exception. And now Hosey says, this is bad, and because of this state of exception, we're in a state of exception, and we need to then oppose him effectively with all normal rules suspended. So both Trump and this Stanford scholar say we're in a state of exception where all moral norms need to be set aside. So the terrain is divided into places where truth lives and places where it doesn't. So for the Stanford scholar, truth lives on the street with the organizers of the anti-Trump resistance in the mutual aid network, but it doesn't live in the law firm, or the courtroom, right? So he devalues what's going on with the elite law firms, and he elevates the grassroots political organizer. And he says, I understand the crisis, right? There's an area of American life where the truth rules, and then there's another area where it doesn't. And this is how expertise works in contested political movements, not by persuading through evidence, but by getting audience to grant deference to the experts.
where the most significant opposition to the administration's constitutional abuses can and should take place. Consider a recent example. 4 law firms had refused to capitulate to Mr. Trump's executive orders last year.
So if anti-Trump political activism, if this kind of direct action and decentralized resistance to Trump is authorized by the emergency that we're in, so who decides we're in a state of emergency? Who decides when the emergency ends? Right? What counts as sufficient evidence that the courts are working? What counts as evidence that the constitutional order is holding? What counts as evidence that the emergency frame should be retired? He offers no answers because his frame does not contain any answer. And I emailed him, and I think he granted that I'd raised a provocative point.
Even worse than him, the new Supreme leader. But the reformist camp kind of get misrepresented because people hear reformist and they think, oh, well, then we should support that person because there's a chance for change in Iran. This is a total misreading of the situation. And I think almost any Iranians would agree with that sentiment, especially post-2009 with what happened in the Green Revolution. There were a lot of Iranians who were willing to try, who wanted to work with people on the ground inside Iran and thought that perhaps there are some of these leaders who were able to work with to make a better future inside of Iran. After 2009, that myth was shattered because there is no difference between reformists and hardliners in terms of how they govern. First of all, because the reformists don't have any ability to do so. All of the decisions ultimately, as I said, circle back to the supreme leader. So it doesn't matter what policies they believe in. If they were someone who believed in democracy and freedom and those things, at their core, the IRGC would never allow them to run in the first place. So part of the idea of having reformists is having controlled opposition within the country. And this is hugely advantageous to the IRGC because they're able to give the impression that they will consider.
You remember that Sarah Silverman movie, Jesus is Magic? I made a mistake. I was part of a synagogue, and we would hire off-duty law enforcement, and this one guy was a very fine Christian and very Jew-friendly. He said he'd do the work even if he wasn't paid. And I mistakenly told him about the Sarah Silverman movie, Jesus is Magic, and it was very hurtful to him, and I should never have done that. Well, it's fun to see how often all these magical incantations are invoked in our esteemed elite news media, such as the New York Times. Here is an example from today.
U.S. leaders need to see what's happening in China. This article is by Jing Qian and Neil Thomas and read by an automated voice.
And why do they need to see? Because visiting China is magic, right? It just conveys all sorts of wisdom that is not available to those who don't visit China. Just like learning about the Holocaust is magic. It just automatically, supposedly, makes you a better person to learn about this or that genocide.
President Trump has postponed his visit to China by several weeks, blaming the U.S.-Israel war with Iran. The trip, which could help stabilize the U.S. relationship with Beijing and revive wider exchanges, should not be allowed to slide indefinitely. Washington needs to restore regular travel by American policymakers to China, which dropped sharply in recent years, just as the economic and
So who's making this argument? Experts on Chinese policy and foreign policy with the Asia Society that encourages the very thing here that they are promoting. Right, let's look at the core claim. Americans misunderstand China because they don't visit. Right, it sounds reasonable, but it quietly assumes that seeing China equals knowing China, which is weak. Right? The article sells visiting China as a corrective, as an essential path to truth, but they don't consider how the experience of visiting China is extensively curated, filtered, and strategically managed by China. Right? China is about the most stage-managed society on earth for foreign visitors. You don't just see China. You see flagship cities like Shanghai. You see model factories and innovation hubs. You meet with English-speaking elites. You have carefully permitted conversations. You don't see any internal dissent, dysfunction, crises, mess, right? So the article replaces one abstraction with another. Right? Instead of China as a distant threat, it gives you China as a dazzling modernity. right? They are both partial insights into truth. They're both politically useful, but this is just textbook coalition signaling, right? If you just align with the engaged and technocratic realism of this group, right? They have a particular moral language, seeing her firsthand, the power of reducing miscalculation, less theatrical policy, more pragmatic competition, right? These are the serious adults in the room. How do you know they are the serious adults in the room? Because they value nuance. They delegitimize hawkish or ideological stances as naive or performative, right? We need more institutional exchange, which just so happens to benefit them, their network, their think tanks, their policy institutes, their exchange programs, right? People who visit China are epistemically privileged. Epistemics means how do we know what we know? As if proximity or the experience of visiting China just gives you some kind of monopoly on truth. Give me a break.
Political competition between the two countries has intensified. No American president has set foot in China since Mr. Trump did in 2017.
Very concerning. I'm deeply worried.
Reforms, or that they'll make small concessions here and there, and that gets the attention off them, especially when it comes to human rights abuses. And this is what they've done with the hijab issue. There was a lot of international pressure after the Women Life Freedom protest, the murder of Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman, by the morality police inside Iran, that set off a spark of millions of protesters rising up against the regime, calling for regime change. Now, in response to this, after we saw the election of the president, and Pezeshkian, who's a reformist, won this election. Now, all over the West, they were saying, oh, is there potential for change? Is there potential for change? No, absolutely not, and I'll explain why. Pezeshkian himself, he's a medical doctor, and he was the senior, leader, I don't know what the exact title is, in one of the hospitals prior to his position now in politics and in government. And when he was put into that position of power, the very first thing that he did was mandate hijab for all women in the hospital before it was law in the Islamic Republic. That's a reformist in the Islamic Republic of Iran. So there is no actual difference. He's part of the system, he's part of the ideology, and that is actually the core reason why today you see Iranians saying, we cannot trust anybody inside Iran to lead a transition. It's a huge part of the motivation for many people, whether or not they like the Shah. Many people, including some of the minority groups inside Iran, are chanting for the return of Reza Pahlavi to Iran to lead this transition to a national referendum in which they will decide what system of government after. But even people who didn't like his father are coming out in support of him because they understand that no one inside the system can be trusted to oversee such a transition because they're too embedded in the regime. It's a mafia-style regime. Even people who don't really support it are oftentimes forced to be involved if they're in Iran. And more evidence of that can be found in what happened with the Iranian women's football team.
So, do you guys know Camilla Cavendish? I was reading the Financial Times, as one does on a weekend, and I was just taken by her name, Camilla Cavendish. I mean, what an amazing name. I am awestruck by this name, Camilla Cavendish. So, what a beautiful woman as well. And Britain must be vigilant to the risk of sabotage by hostile states. You go, Camilla. If Moscow and Beijing are determined to destabilize the West, then new strategies are needed. Amen. I mean, this is my type of woman. A former associate editor and chief leader writer of The Times, she is a research fellow at the Mosava Rahmani Center for Business and Government, Harvard Kennedy School. She was head of the Downing Street Policy Unit under Prime Minister David Cameron and is a winner of the Harold Wincott and Paul Foote Awards for Journalism. Wow, this is some Sheila. Oh, looks a little different in person.
The same trajectory, ultimately. And some of this, I've interviewed women all over the world about this, and a lot of this is...
I love her accent. I love her name. Camilla Cavendish. I just love to say it. It is so classy, very much like myself. And so I had to go find other names that would bring me equal amounts of pleasure. So here are names of real Englishmen. Tiger Lily Cavendish. Tiger Lily Cavendish. She sounds like a beaut, Sheila. Octavia Fitzmaurice. You got a Roman numerical first name with a Norman French surname. That's my favorite combo. Inigo Philbrick. Now, I must warn you, he is a controversial figure in the art world. But Inigo, what a classic marker of a high status, high society, high class bloke. Tatiana Mountbatten. If I were to meet a Tatiana Mountbatten in the flesh, I would just get weak at the knees. Have you ever met a Tatiana Mountbatten? Humphrey Butler. That's a good name for a bloke. Here are more real names from real members of the English upper class. Cosima Grosvenor. She is the daughter of the current Duke of Westminster, Cosima Grosvenor. Peregrine Cavendish. This is the 12th Duke of Devonshire. Edward Fitzalan Howard. This is the 18th Duke of Norfolk. I realize that I shouldn't be fanboying over this aristocracy, but I got to be me. George Montague Douglas Scott. He is the Earl of Dalkeith and the heir to the dukedom of Buccleuch. Right, this family is the largest private landowner in the UK. I want to meet George Montague Douglas Scott. Ludovic Spencer Churchill, a younger member of the family that holds the dukedom of Marlborough and includes Winston Churchill. Right, here are some high-status players in England. Araminta Birch, prominent in London's luxury, fashion, and society circles. Cressida Bonas, an actress and model. Laura Vesterberg, the granddaughter of Princess Alexandra and a fixture in the London art world. Algernon Percy. His family holds the dukedom of Northumberland, owners of the Alnwick Castle seen in the Harry Potter films. Allegra Stratton, prominent journalist and former government advisor. Mungo Montgomery. Now, here are some real names from birth announcements in the Telegraph, which is the traditional way the English elite announce new arrivals. Ottilie Susha Clementine. Balthazar Frederick Cecilou. Fenella India Rose. Caspar Louis Oscar. Henrietta Madeline. These posh names. My God. Thank God I'm sober these days.
Really positive story of female empowerment. Women getting careers, throwing off the shackles of the duty to the household. Quite a lot of negativity about the mother-in-law,
I want to have tea with this woman. I could listen to her all day.
You want to be freed from a lot of this convention and quite a lot of criticism, as you can.
She must do Alexander technique. Look at this beautiful long neck. Look at how poised her head is on top of her shoulders. Notice the lovely width of her shoulders. A much higher percentage of the upper class in England do Alexander technique than in, I think, anywhere else in the world, and much higher percentage than the lower classes.
You can imagine all over the world from women saying, men are not stepping up. They're not doing the chores. They're not splitting things
Amen,
equally.
sister.
And quite a lot of evidence in Europe that the countries which we all think of as the ultimate perfection countries, the Scandinavians and so on, where actually men do seem to really be very positive about women's careers, very supportive and supportive.
No one's more positive than I am. I love these posh names. They're the best. I'm sorry. I need a moment.
In Australia this past week, where they were at the Asia Cup, they refused to sing the anthem of the Islamic Republic. They were threatened as a result by officials inside of Iran. And 5 or 6 of them, I believe it was in the end, applied for asylum in Australia and decided to stay. The rest of the team went back. Most recent updates is that I believe it's 4 of them or 5 of them now have decided to go back to Iran. From all the reports from everyone who knows them, and we even knew this before, that they were threatening their families. At least in one of the cases, one of the athletes, they don't know where her family is. So it's very concerning what's happening on the ground. But I have to say, it's not new. It's not new. I mean, this is what the Islamic Republic has done for years. They've politicized sport, and they've used it as something to legitimize their international acceptance. And that's a total perversion of what sports should be. And the way that they persecuted their athletes, it's criminal, obviously, but it shouldn't be accepted by the international sporting agencies. You know, to refuse to compete against Israeli athletes, for example, is a long-standing tradition of the regime. I mean, these are athletes in Iran who work their whole lives for some of these opportunities. And it's taken away in an instant because the Islamic Republic doesn't want them to face off against an Israeli. It's ridiculous. And beyond that, I mean, they have executed some of their top athletes for protesting, for opposition to the regime, going all the way back to the early 1980s. Dozens of athletes have been executed. Football players on the national team executed. The women's volleyball captain was executed in the 1980s, I believe it was. I mean, the list goes on and on. In recent years, we saw Navid Afkari, a champion wrestler in Iran. He was executed for taking part in protests. So it's a criminal, savage regime that cares very much about their perception, but not enough to actually do the right thing in any of these cases. Just enough to try to cover it up and to use some of these opportunities in international sport to advance their own agenda and to exert control and pressure on their own citizens. I mean, it's disgraceful.
Say more about the 2009 Green Revolution. What was that about? What happened? What was the upshot of that?
Well, the 2009 protests were about election fraud, basically. I don't want to go into too much detail because it's not actually so relevant to today because there have been so many uprisings. I mean, we saw student uprisings before that. We saw it in the 1980s as well. And every time there have been these uprisings, there have been mass executions as a result. The most horrific being what we saw 2 months ago now with the execution or murder on the streets of around 30 to 40,000, we believe it is. And it's similar reactions every time there's an uprising. The Iranian people are unarmed. They don't really have the ability to combat the strength and the scale of the regime, especially when we're talking about a regime that prioritizes repression, even over their own well-being. They've completely destroyed their own currency, which is one of many, but one of the factors that contributed to this last wave of protests. They have sent the money of the Iranian people all over the world to terror proxies to destabilize.
So in these chaotic, perplexing times, I wish we had the wisdom of George Shultz around. I wish he was still here to guide us. Just such a great man.
I'm Bill Whalen. I'm the Hoover Institution's Virginia
Bill.
Hobbs Carpenter Distinguished Policy Fellow in Journalism. I'm not the only fellow who is podcasting these days. I encourage you to go to Hoover's website and check out what we have to offer. You can find that by going to hoover.org/podcast, and there you'll see just a whole fleet of remarkably great podcasts, including, if I may say so, the audio version of the Goodfellow Show that I have the honor of doing with Neil Ferguson, John Cochran, and H.R. McMaster. Now, if you're listening to this while you're driving at your car, look at your gas gauge, because if it's low, like most Americans, you're dreading a fill-up. And count me in that camp. After this podcast is over, I have to go fill up my SUV. It's going to be about a 15 to 20.
I apologize. I didn't cue it up correctly, so shoot me. I want to get to the wit and wisdom of George Shultz and his piercing blue eyes. They would just see right through you. I wish good old George was still around because he had such wisdom. And to be part of some kind of chain of tradition going back to those piercing blue eyes of George Shultz. Oy vey.
Podcast David Fetter. David Fetter is the Stevenson Policy Fellow at the Hoover Institution, where he supports fellowship research within the George P. Shultz Energy Policy Working Group, Hoover's National Security-Oriented Global Policy and Strategy Initiative, and the joint Hoover-Asia Society Working Group on Semiconductors and the Security of the United States and Taiwan. David, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Happy to be here, Bill.
So, question. How did you get to Hoover? Where did we get you from? Who did we steal you from?
Good question. George Shultz recruited me to Hoover about 14 years ago.
And what a great man. Did I tell you about George Shultz's piercing blue eyes? The way that man's intellect would just cut to the nub of the matter.
I was a student here at Stanford, considering a future life in academic research. And I saw Shultz around campus talking about energy issues. And I thought, you know what? This guy has his head screwed on right. I didn't know anything about his history beyond sort of headlines. I was a child of the 80s. But I came to know him over the years, and I'm
talk about a man with his head screwed on right, just piercing intellect, and those blue eyes were just to die for.
Glad I did.
Did you actually have to sit down for an interview with the great man?
I did.
Most of all, good old George, he had a smile that would just light up the room.
As you remember, Bill, and I think many of us here at Hoover, those bright blue eyes would stare right into your soul as you sat across from him. I remember many mornings, both in the interview and later, on the couch in his office in the corner at the Herbert Hoover Memorial Building. And you had to be on your A game when you're in front of Schultz.
Oh, yeah.
You really did.
Really?
I know what you're talking about, the piercing blue eyes. He didn't blink his eyes a lot either, so sometimes he would just look at you. And I remember being in a meeting with him one time, David, with a group of fellows, and he was looking at me. And I didn't know if it was one of those things where he was trying to figure out who I was and what I was doing in the room, or I looked particularly stupid that day, but he would just look at you. The other great talent he had, and boy, I could talk all day about George Schultz because what a fascinating man. He had just this brilliant mind, David, that was able just to kind of get to the heart of matters. I'd get called into a meeting with him when somebody would come to Hoover offering a ballot initiative, and they'd want to come meet the great man and get his endorsement. So he would sit there very patiently. They would talk for half an hour on why their particular initiative was, the greatest thing since sliced bread and was going to change the world as we knew it. And then at the end of the presentation, Secretary Schultz would kind of sit back for a second, and you, of course, lived this more than I did. He would say in his very calm, dignified voice, "That was a very interesting presentation." And then there'd be pause. He'd go, "However, I have the following concern." And then just like pulling out the one piece of straw from the fat shut that brings the whole thing down, David, he would just kind of immediately just kind of blow up the initiative. And the poor people just walk out of there crestfallen, happy to have met him, but just realizing they'd been kind of taught a lesson.
That's right, Bill. And, I think about George Schultz.
I think about George Schultz, too, is piercing blue eyes and just that timeless wisdom that he had.
For sure, in weeks like this. And I came to work with him on his then Energy Policy Task Force, which was set up around 2007 when oil prices were very high. We're getting back there now. And Schultz would look back to his history. Actually, when he first worked for President Richard Nixon, one of his first jobs.
So George Schultz was on the board of Theranos. And when his grandson kept warning him that Theranos was a big scam, well, of course, George Schultz sided with the scam and against his own grandson. And he recruited Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State, former Secretary of Defense William Perry, former U.S. Senator Sam Nunn, all to the Theranos board. He was completely under the sway of scam artist Elizabeth Holmes. But gosh, George Schultz had such great judgment promoting this scam and recruiting for this scam and humiliating and demeaning his own grandson who kept warning him this was a scam. So George Schultz all in on the Theranos scam, but he had such great judgment. He had those piercing blue eyes.
Was to lead a task force on the oil import crisis in 1969.
Man, if only we had that kind of wisdom with us today.
As other countries to take up territory in some of those countries, occupy it, and carry out terror attacks, both against others in the region and, of course, against Israel, if possible. And all of this, while the Iranian people don't have basic resources or infrastructure because it's not upkept by the regime, to carry out their everyday lives. I mean, the economy is in shambles. There's not proper electricity. The water crisis is existential almost. Tehran has no water. Like the mismanaged.
All right, you want to show that you are elite? Use the word existential as often as possible. Okay, the following news, guys. I have to flag it for you. This is existential. They don't want you to see this. The 2026 Iran war plan leaked. So one thing that I've come to hate about the Enforcer channel is their hyperbolic, low-class, nonsensical headlines and rhetoric. So I asked Gemini to classify YouTube video titles about current events. So the high-status title is clinical, detached, and authoritative, such as what I am using, right? The Iran war analysis. So you use the simple present tense, you don't use punctuation, you do not use exclamation points, and you use a Ernest Hemingway type brevity. So the 2026 National Security Strategy, a structural analysis. Now, a mid-tier title, right, will be more explanatory, sensible, comprehensive. You'll use numbers, professional qualifiers, essentially, and you'll focus on understanding and explained. So why the new security strategy actually changes everything for the Pacific, right? You recruit allies by offering epistemic security, promises the viewer that they can master a complex topic without being tricked by either the elites or the mob. Now, the enforcer uses low-status titles. They don't want you to see this. The 2026 war plan leaked. They use all caps. They use they. They use exclamation points. The truth about. They say shocking. How about newspaper headlines? Right? They use a nominal, passive, and intentionally dry style. They avoid puns, slang, or any sense of excitement that might suggest the paper is trying to sell itself. They use long, multi-clause sentences, heavy use of colons, absence of bold fonts, or exclamation points. They want to signal institutional reliability and historical permanence. Example, federal budget reconciliation process faces delays amid multilateral negotiation gridlock. Now, the middle brow headline will be, why the news budget delay is a blow to hardworking families and who is to blame. And the tabloid approach will be, all caps, budget blooper, slow-mo poll stall our cash. Okay, let's say you got upper class, middle class, and lower class bloke all at a sports bar. They all see the same touchdown, and they all text a friend about the touchdown. So, high status bloke says, successful execution of the vertical concept against the standard quarters look, 6. The middle class bloke says, Stroud actually manipulated the safety there. That's a 70% success rate on that specific RPO look this season. Low status guy texts, let's go. They can't stop us. Stroud is the GOAT. Right, they want to signal underdog solidarity, use screaming syntax and collective pronouns, prove he is a faithful member of the tribe. Okay, what else we got here? Great stuff. You don't want to miss this. All right, how do the different classes talk about their favorite player? So the upper class guy will say, the left tackle's pass blocking efficiency is the primary determinant of the offensive sequence. His technical consistency allows for a 95% protection rate against the edge rush protocol. He is the quiet anchor of the system. The middle class guy will say, Stroud is actually the most efficient QB under pressure this season. He essentially manipulates the pocket to create a 12% increase in completion probability. The data actually suggests he is the most reliable curator of the RPO look. Low status bloke will say, bro, Stroud is a beast. He literally carries this whole team on his back. The media tried to cancel him, but we know he's the GOAT. Let's go. Okay, let's imagine that the upper class, middle class, and lower class bloke have all seen both seasons of the great Netflix show America's Sweethearts, the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. And now they're telling their friends about why they love the show. Upper class guy. Well, the program provides a structural analysis of the Cowboys' branding infrastructure. The selection sequence identifies the 95% threshold required for total aesthetic and athletic integration into the franchise's global market position. It is an audit of elite human capital. Middle class guy says, technical precision is actually insane. You essentially see how a single degree of off-axis rotation during the jump split results in an immediate 10% decrease in the visual uniformity. The data actually shows that the kick line is the most efficient synchronization protocol in pro sports. Low status guy says, bro, the work they put in is unreal. The judges are so brutal, but the girls just keep pushing. We have to support them because they are the heart of the team. Let's go. Okay, now all three classes of bros have to text their wives that they're going to be late from the sports bar. Oh, high status dude says, conclusion of the event is delayed. Expect arrival at 19:30 following the final scoring sequence. Middle class dude, the game is actually going into overtime, which essentially pushes the rideshare window back. I should be home in roughly 35 minutes once the traffic settles. Low status dude, OMG, babe, we are going to overtime. You wouldn't believe this. I'll be home ASAP. Let's go. Okay, now each dude is going to be late to work. High status dude texts his boss. Arrival at 09:15 following a localized transit delay. Proceed with the agenda sequence. Middle class dude. There's actually a significant backup on the 405, which essentially adds 15 minutes to the commute. I'll be dined in by 09:10 to catch the briefing. Low status dude to his boss. I'm so sorry! Exclamation, exclamation. Traffic is a nightmare today! Exclamation, exclamation. I'm hurrying and we'll be there ASAP. 4 exclamations. Okay, now lunchroom discussion where they talk about their hangover. The high status guy. Fluid replacement, electrolyte recalibration are in progress. Homeostasis should return by 1400 following the lunch hour hydration cycle. Middle class. I'm actually using a specific NAC and B complex stack right now. It essentially targets the acetaldehyde buildup before the 2 p.m. slump hits as a 90% success rate for me. Low status dude. Bro, I'm dying. That last round killed me. I need the greasiest burger on the menu stat. Okay, how do they each talk about their tax filing strategy? High status. Liquidity event confirmed. Allocation proceeds to the 2026 diversified index sequence for long-term homeostatic growth. Middle class dude. I'm actually rotating this into the 2026 tax refund speculation market. Essentially captures a 15% arbitrage opportunity while the Supreme Court ruling settles. Low status dude. The Fed's finally paid up. I'm getting that new truck and the whole squad is coming to the lake. Let's go. All right, now they each try to hit on a woman at the sports bar. High status dude says to her, the atmospheric density in this section is preferable to the main bar. Current scoring sequence suggests a prolonged evening. Middle class dude. This specific IPA is actually brewed with a cold press method that essentially removes the bitter aftertaste. It is a 90% success rate for people who usually prefer seltzers. Low status dude. You seeing this? We're absolutely crushing them. You have the best vibe in this whole place. Let's go. Okay, I love that. That amused me. Don't know what it did for you. Hope it was as good for you as it was for me.
Management of the regime is what contributes, initially at least, to a lot of these protest movements. In some cases, it's triggered by an incident of cruelty, such as Mahsa Amini, the murder of Mahsa Amini. But there's also a host of other factors that go into these efforts. And I think people saw the Green movement, the Green Revolution, as an opportunity for reform. As I mentioned, they thought that if they all voted a certain way, perhaps the reality could be different in the coming years. And what they received was a stolen election again. And this was a huge part of the momentum, both in terms of making the public realize that there is no reforming the Islamic Republic, but also in terms of showing the world again how this regime reacts time and time again to opposition. I mean, they're shameless. Again, we're talking about a regime that literally shot down a commercial airliner, PS-752, and then tried to frame another country for it before they got caught. This is an airliner that had 0 American citizens on it, by the way, but many, many Iranian citizens. And the regime's purpose in shooting down this airliner was that they wanted to accuse the United States of doing this because of the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Obviously, that didn't succeed, but that's the scale of depravity that we're talking about when it comes to dealing with this regime. And you know, the West doesn't really understand this. The Iranians have had to learn the hard way that there really is no other option. And I think that's why you see such a difference today in the responses of your average person on the street in the West to the war and your average Iranian, both in the West and in Iran. There was a very strong positive response from Iranians. Everyone I have spoken to, everyone, including those who don't really like America so much, they were all positive about.
Right, here's some analysis that I liked. Hormuz is about to become an American firing lane. That is the signal. The A-10 chatter means the war has moved past signaling into hunting. The mission now is to systematically kill the cheap Iranian tools that create outsized chaos. Fast boats, mine layers, swarmcraft, coastal teams, pop-up disruption, the whole dirty toolkit. This means Washington has chosen forced reopening over negotiated reopening. That's the whole game now. Iran's real leverage was never some grand conventional balance. It was the ability to use small, ugly, deniable assets to make the world's energy artery feel unsafe. The U.S. is now serious about stalking and deleting those assets in real time. Iran's most usable form of power starts collapsing. That is why the threats are widening toward desalination grids and civilian systems. Tehran can feel the straight weapon slipping. It is reaching for uglier hostages. The plane itself is secondary. The meaning is primary. A-10 planes mean low, dirty, persistent killing. They can fly for hours overhead. They are waiting. They are watching. They are erasing anything that moves. That tells the objective is no longer abstract deterrence. The objective is operational ownership of the corridor. So this is kind of middle brow. So what's going on? America is preparing to butcher the denial mechanism, not scare it, not out-message it, destroy it. That's the next phase of the war. Likely direction is clear. Iran loses its best coercive lever in the strait. The Gulf corridor is reopened by force. Oil comes down because the hostage mechanism is broken. The dangerous part comes first. A cornered Iran lashes out at civilian dependencies because that is all it has with real bite. Water, power, urban stability, that's the final card. The A-10 is the public tell that the war has entered the... I don't think I can say this word. It's a bad word that starts with E and is very long. Phase for Iran's Hormuz denial assets. Woo.
The U.S. efforts, U.S. and Israeli efforts against the regime inside of Iran. Nobody wants war. Nobody wants their country to be invaded. But the fact that you see so many Iranians to the point of desperation where they are begging another country to bomb their regime, that should tell you how bad the situation is.
Mark Halperin gave a lecture at Hillsdale College.
As a new form of media, talk about constructive alternatives. I believe two-way is a constructive alternative as a business model for the media, but also for serving the public interest. So after that, we're going to do Q&A. As far as I'm concerned, no topics off limits. Then you can ask about whatever you want. You can have Washington Bureau right near the White House. And I said I wanted the job, but I wanted to do it from the ABC headquarters on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I told them I wanted to be more in touch with the real lives of real people. And amazingly, they bought that. So I've lived in Manhattan, but I've covered politics in 49 of the 50 states. And this is one of the few iconic American places I'd never been before today, so I'm appreciative for the invitation to come here. But I've been everywhere, and I don't believe that all the wisdom in the United States is found in Washington and New York, to say the least. Part of why I was one of the few people in my business to believe Donald Trump could win the election in 2016 is because I covered Trump rallies in more than 30 states, and I talked to Trump voters at all those rallies. And I learned again that there was a different point of view than you would hear in most parts of Washington and New York. I met President Trump well before he ran for president. I met him in 2011. And I live about a mile from him in New York, about a mile from Trump Tower, where he basically lived. And I'd met him a few times at book parties, but I didn't really know him. And then in 2011, he spoke at CPAC, the annual meeting in Washington, for conservative activists from across the country, a lot of younger people. And plenty of people who want to run for president as Republicans show up and speak at CPAC. And President Trump came that year, and he gave the best speech of anybody at CPAC. I watched them all, and his speech got the best reception.
Dennis Prager said the speech was disqualifying, that Donald Trump could never be a serious presidential candidate. Why? Because he used profanity.
If you go on YouTube or cspan.org and watch the speech, it'll be very familiar to you. It talks about China ripping us off, Mexico ripping us off, illegal immigrants, career politicians not knowing what they're doing. And so I went on Morning Joe the Monday after CPAC ended, and I said, I saw all the speeches of every contender, and Donald Trump's was the best. And if you don't take him seriously as a presidential candidate, again, this is 2011 for the 2012 cycle where he was thinking about running. I said, if you don't take him seriously, take his ideas seriously. And in many ways, President Trump is a complicated person, but in many ways, he's quite simple. One thing about him is if you go on television and say nice things about him, he likes you. So later that day, he called me up and he said, Donald Trump, come to Trump Tower and let's talk politics. So I went over and I got there right on time, and he was in a meeting that kept me waiting. And his top political aide at the time showed me into his office, and we sat waiting for Donald Trump to become available. That guy's name is Michael Cohen, who back then was a Trump loyalist. And on Michael Cohen's wall of his office, there was a bookshelf filled with binders. And I asked him what they were. He said, these are letters that people have written to President Trump asking him to run for president. I said, can I see? He took one down. And these were mostly handwritten, some typed letters from all over the country, people saying, please run for president. You have to run for president. We need you to run for president. Here's $5. Imagine giving a billionaire a $5 bill, asking him to run for president. Two other experiences informed my view of President Trump and the fact that he was...
So I did not know the following.
Of Islamism, it can seem like the communists were just used and discarded, as opposed to it continuing to be part of the philosophy.
Well, Khomeinism at its core does have elements of Marxism. It always has. It was part of the reason they worked with the PLO. I mean, I would say the PLO is more communist than they are Islamist, strictly, despite the fact that they're a terror organization. So that was a natural match, ideologically. But the groups that supported Khomeini at the time of the revolution also include the Mujahideen, MEK, they're known as. Or they also have a lobbying group in the United States known as NCRI, where they pretend to be democratic. This is an organization that actively helped the Ayatollah come to power in 1979. And then after the Islamist faction took over, they did persecute the communists, including MEK, which is why MEK now claims that they are opposition to the regime. Now, this is something totally rejected by the Iranian people. Nobody really likes MEK. They don't trust them probably just as much, if not more, than the regime itself. So this is not a credible opposition to the regime. And despite that, that's something that they continue to parrot in international media as well. This idea that there are multiple options for opposition, when in reality there really aren't right now. As I mentioned, you can love the guy, you can hate the guy, but Reza Pahlavi is really the only person who Iranians, the most important people in this equation right now, that Iranians would accept as a transition leader. So that's another narrative, by the way, that they continue to promote in the Western media to attack Reza Pahlavi and minimize his influence. Oh, he doesn't have any support, when clearly he does.
Is MEK also Shia?
Yeah, MEK is a Shia organization, but the emphasis with them is less on religion and more on, well, ultimately communism, Marxism.
And NCRI, what does that stand for?
The National Council of Resistance of Iran is what they call themselves. And this is a lobbying front for MEK that spends hundreds of thousands of dollars, basically, for lack of a better way of explaining it, buying off mostly has-been politicians in the United States and Europe, as well as several other places, in order to exert influence and get these people to speak out about MEK. And we've seen exactly that happening. Rudy Giuliani is one of them. He's been paid quite a bit of money to speak at MEK events, and he's been parroting all the usual talking points. First of all, obsessively anti-Pahlavi. It's like a real visceral hatred that MEK has of Reza Pahlavi, despite the fact that he's never done anything to them. His father, maybe you can talk about, but they're projecting that onto Reza Pahlavi himself. Another politician that they're working with a lot is Mike Pompeo. Unfortunately, he's been very, very involved. I believe they paid him maybe even 6 figures to speak at one of their events, and he has been promoting them a little bit here and there throughout this past 2-week campaign. But the reality at the end of the day is they don't have any support. I mean, the Iranian people hate this group. They don't even want them to be part of their protests. It's not like a mainstream Iranian opposition group at all. And the other thing that they keep promoting, these whitelisted accounts continue to promote in the West, is both separatism and that the West is promoting separatism. Separatism is this idea that Iran can be divided into different, I guess, ethnic or even religious, in some cases, territories. Iran has a huge population of, minority ethnicities. They have Azeris, they have Balochis, they have Kurds, they have all different kinds of groups inside Iran. And despite that, the majority of these communities want to be part of Iran. They're not really interested in dividing the country. But there's a small fringe minority in some of these groups that does want that. Kurdish separatists and Azeri. It exists. It's minimal, but it exists. The problem is that there's a large Kurdish faction outside of Iran, the Syrian Kurds and the Iraqi Kurds, who have different goals and do not have the same vision as most of the Iranian Kurds. And the West doesn't understand the difference between them. And so the regime has successfully used this as a tool to scare Iranians inside by saying that the West wants to promote separatism. They want to divide Iran. This is an extremely sensitive issue for Iranians. Like, if there's anything that could push them towards the regime, it would be this. It's something that they viscerally oppose. Like the same way that a lot of Israelis, if you tell them, we should divide Jerusalem, like nobody's going to, it's the what? Like, what are you talking about? So this is how Iranians view the idea of dividing Iran. So anything or anyone who promotes this idea of a, Kurdish invasion of Iran or working with Azeris to overthrow the regime, this triggers a lot of sensitivities in the Iranian public to unite and unite against the West in that regard. So that's why the regime has used that narrative, both separatism itself and also that the West is promoting separatism as something to scare people and to manipulate public opinion. So they'll promote separatism in the West at the same time that they then go to Iranians and say, oh, look, they're supporting separatism. They want to divide Iran.
What is the ultimate goal outside of Iran for the regime?
The ultimate goal outside of Iran is ultimately to establish dominance all over the entire world in an Islamic caliphate of some kind. They are a doomsday scenario, extremist version, 12-er Shia Islam, extremist version of Islam, and that is their ultimate. Well, this is a radical ideology. It's not something mainstream that even your average person in the West would support if they really knew what Khomeinism is all about. And they do want to impose those same rules and style of life everywhere that they are, and that's exactly what we've seen. Well, you think the situation for women in Hezbollah or women in the Houthis is any better than what's going on for the women of Iran? If anything, it's worse. We're talking about a even more radical community, not the regime itself, but the community is very, very radical in those places. And we see all kinds of egregious human rights violations of women and children happening in all of those organizations. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the proxies in Iraq, the proxies that were operating in Syria. This is what they do.
What's the fundamental belief system? I mean, aside from the basics of Islam, what's the Khomeinism part of it?
Khomeinism is this state version. It's combining the political power with an extreme religious ideology. Obviously, there are specifics about, who took the succession from the Prophet Muhammad and who came after that and who killed. There's a long history of conflict between Sunni and Shia, but basically 12-er Shia Islam says that the 12th Imam will come, and that's what all of the ideology is based on. That itself isn't the extreme part. The extreme part is the implementation of this ideology as a system of formal government. It is political Islam at its core, and not Islam let's all be friends and talk about interfaith diversity. No, like extreme, hardcore Sharia law, all the stuff that you think is a conspiracy. That is the Islamic Republic. Sadly, I know some people will dismiss me even for saying this, but that is the reality. And that's why you see Iranians, even in the United States, sounding, to your average Western person, sounding extreme, because they have seen this and they've experienced it firsthand. And I only have a taste of this living in the Middle East and being on the receiving end of ballistic missiles here in Israel and dealing with the terror proxies of the regime. But to live under a system like this for 47 years, it's a very, very different reality. It's a dystopian reality that many people in the West could not comprehend living under. It is the real life Handmaid's Tale.
What is the conspiratorial thing that you're talking about? When you said people sound, if you hear, Iranian, I guess they're refugees or dissidents, people who fled, who know what it's like, and they live in the U.S. or they live here. What is it that they say that sounds so crazy?
I think there's been a very vocal opposition to Islam. A lot of them speak out very strongly against it because they've lived under political Islam and they know what the dangers are. And that's why you saw a lot of Iranians also speaking out very strongly about the New York City mayor, Zoran Mamdani, because he himself is a Shia Muslim. But beyond that, he's someone that's explicitly been in support of pro-terror groups. I mean, he was marching in New York City in these protests, calling to globalize the Intifada. I mean, this is someone who is an extremist. These are protests that were burning American flags. Like, that's who's running New York City. He campaigned on cutting off funding to the NYPD, but also cutting off cooperation on counterterrorism, intelligence sharing with Israel, because he doesn't like Israel. Like, how's cutting off your nose to spite your face, literally. So it's stupidity. But the Iranians saw that this is a soft power campaign to put somebody in political office, even if it's a lower office, to exert that sort of influence and to mainstream those radical ideas. And it's the same thing that they saw happen in Iran in the lead up to the revolution in 79, particularly in universities. Iranians have been very vocal about the pro-Hamas protests after October 7th. In some cases, even more vocal than Jewish communities in the area, because they identify what's happening incorrectly, sadly, but they identify what's happening with the disinformation and the subversion and the pro-Islamism on campuses in the United States in order to radicalize youth, to misrepresent the situation globally. In that case, it was with the Gaza war. In this case, it's with the war in Iran, and to get Americans divided on this issue.
What do you think the biggest misconception is in the West or in the U.S. in particular?
I think the biggest misunderstanding and misconception that Americans have about the Islamic Republic is that they think like us, that they are motivated by the same things, and that this is an entity that can be reasoned with. And this is a mistake that the left and the right have done in the United States and all the Western world with Iran for many years. This is not a regime that acts in what we would consider to be rational interest. They are motivated primarily by ideology, and even when an individual is not motivated by ideology who's within the regime, they are stopped by those who are motivated by ideology. As I mentioned, everything goes back to the supreme leader and the Islamic, political Islam rule over that country. That's what guides all the decision-making, all the candidates, all the policies, everything. So until you deal with that, you can't really see real change on the ground. But Americans often don't understand that this is the reality. And that's why we've seen so many failed attempts at negotiations. There's no negotiating with a regime that's fundamentally dedicated to destroying the United States. And they've been very explicit about that from day one. And they're not coming in yet. They're not coming in with a nuclear weapon to blow up America. And so Americans say, oh, well, what's the threat? The threat is 47 years of subversion that we've already seen. The threat is attacking American troops on foreign soil. The threat is bombing American bases in the Middle East. It's murdering over 200 Marines in Lebanon. It's pouring billions of dollars into Hezbollah in Lebanon that have killed American citizens all over the world. It's pouring money and resources into dictatorships in Venezuela and building partnerships with drug cartels to bring drugs and other materials into the United States. That's the threat from Iran. Not to mention the fact that they've been developing ICBMs, which would be capable of reaching the United States directly. And if, God forbid, the Islamic Republic of Iran had a nuclear weapon, you think that they wouldn't use it? This is a regime that just murdered 40,000 citizens, their own citizens, in the streets of Iran for protesting. Not only that, but we're seeing reports from those who survived and witnessed some of these incidents of mass rape. There was gang rape of some of the young women who were arrested or taken in for these protests. There was also an attack on some of the nurses, which provided medical care to the protesters. We saw protesters getting shot in hospitals where they were receiving treatment. I mean, the scale of...
So I love her narratives because they fit with my particular hero system and my worldview. Now, one way I've been trying to reach for status over the last few weeks is I've tried to be as open-minded as possible towards New York's new mayor, Mamdani. And I've said, I think there's a 10% chance that he could be a good mayor and like a 20% chance he could be a decent mayor. Even though most everything he said and done is completely contrary to my hero system, but I'm making a play for status here by trying to show how disinterested and fair-minded I can be. And I just stumbled on some information this past week that looks like it's going to be the bond market that brings Dani to heel. Right? His inability to raise more money, the flagrant danger of his financial plans for the city, and it appears that the bond market has reacted quite negatively. And after all the hubbub, looks like it's the bond market that will keep New York's mayor in check.
Of barbarism is almost beyond comprehension. And that's what I mean when I say it sounds conspiratorial. It sounds almost ridiculous. But I remind you, I watched a film the other day about one of the righteous among the nations who was, I believe he worked in the Swedish government. He rescued a lot of Jewish people, during the war. And when he first learned about the final solution, the response that he had and almost everyone he spoke to was, okay, but what are they going to, they're going to kill all the Jews. Like, they're going to kill all the Jews that they rounded up. Like, it doesn't even make sense. How can that be true that they're going to kill who could do that? It's something unimaginable. Nobody had ever done something like that. And why, for most people, even if they didn't like Jews, that's not the same thing as being like, yeah, I want to murder all the Jews in the world, They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it. And I see some of that same sentiment today, that people are unable to comprehend what is actually happening and how cruel humanity can be to other people. They don't understand that that's the case because they're coming from a place of comparative privilege, where they haven't had to deal with wars on their soil, and they haven't had to deal with the same threat to their immediate safety that many people in other countries have. And so it's easy to sit back and say, well, that doesn't concern us. That's not our problem, when it very much is your problem, because we're not talking only about the direct military threat, which is an issue. We're also talking about the ideological threat, which is something that, frankly, they're much more sinister and much more successful at doing. If there's one thing the Islamic Republic wins at, it's narrative warfare.
What's an example of the success of narrative warfare?
An example of the success of narrative warfare is the Gaza war. If you look at the way that things were so woefully misrepresented, the mental gymnastics required to, even in some cases, condone the actions of Hamas on October 7th. I mean, it should be a pretty low bar to say that you shouldn't kidnap innocent people, especially children, or you shouldn't use rape as a method of war. And yet, at every stage of what happened in this war, we saw pundits and even some mainstream media giving platform, giving, air to this conspiracy that there was, in fact, no rape, that was a hoax, and that Israel...
I need you to understand that I believe kidnapping innocent people is bad and rape is bad.
Israel is targeting children, okay? That Israel is committing genocide. There's all these accusations that have been used, that have been levied against the state of Israel in this conflict. When you look at the actual policies of the idea of whether you agree with them or don't agree with them, they are actually significantly more careful in terms of warfare, especially urban warfare, than other Western actors have been in the past few decades in their conflicts. I mean, if you look at the United States, the UK, other countries as well that were operating in Iraq and Afghanistan, the civilian to combatant ratio is significantly worse in terms of more civilians than what we have seen in Gaza. Now, we don't have a final count. We don't have the total numbers, at least that have been formally released by the IDF. Obviously, there are a lot of casualties. It's a densely populated area. But all logic, all reasoning about the fact this is a legally justified war, it is a declared state of war by the actors involved in this. And in wars, people die. And it seems like people don't understand that this is what happens in war. That's why we didn't want this war. We didn't start this war. Hamas started this war on October 7th. It wasn't Israel that went into Gaza and kidnapped a bunch of kids and started, raping people in the streets. And instead, all of that has been inverted on media and social media without evidence that Israel is the aggressor. Israel is the one that we've been accused of rape.
So I try to appear very objective and disinterested and try to take the 40,000-foot level. But if you want to know what's going on in my heart, right, these are the narratives that I vibrate to.
Accused of murdering children. We've been accused of mass graves. We've been accused of all number of things. And then when it comes down to it, when you get into the actual evidence, there isn't any. Or, actually, it wasn't Israel that bombed Al-Ahli Hospital. It was an Islamic Jihad rocket that misfired and landed in the parking lot. But not before the entire world reported that 500 Palestinians, which isn't even the number, but 500 Palestinians had been killed by Israeli airstrikes on a hospital. So all of that framing, Israel attacking schools and hospitals, Israel committing genocide, all of this rhetoric, this storytelling is from the Islamic Republic and its supporters. Qatar was also a huge part of this with Al Jazeera. But if you notice, Al Jazeera now on the Iran war, even while Qatar is being attacked by the Islamic Republic, and even while Qatar is condemning the Islamic.
So I am shocked at the lack of outrage in the Islamic and Arab worlds with regard to this war. I'm shocked at the lack of outrage and protest around the world, in the United States, on college campuses. I can't believe how passive and limp the opposition has been.
Islamic Republic for their attacks on other Arab countries. Al Jazeera is still doing.
And I can't believe how puny the Iranian response has been. I can't believe how weak it's been. I can't believe how pathetic it's been. If this were a football game, right, it would be 100-0. Now, this could change at any time. But right now, I am shocked by the low number of American casualties. I'm shocked by the low number of Israeli casualties. I'm shocked by how ineffective the Iranian response has been.
Doing the bidding of the Islamic regime in their reporting and how they're covering what's happening.
Aren't they Qatar state-sponsored media?
Yes, Al Jazeera is absolutely Qatari state-sponsored media, and that's the reason why nobody should trust them when it comes to Middle East reporting. And it's really a shame because I think Al Jazeera does some good work on everywhere else in the world. But when it comes to specifically Al Jazeera Arabic and any coverage in any language on the Middle East, particularly Israel, they are incredibly, criminally biased. In some cases.
So every nation at war lies and censors. So I wonder what's going on behind the lies and the censoring. In Israel, is the Iranian damage much more significant than we're told? In America, what are the vulnerabilities that we're lying and censoring? What is the Iranian regime lying and censoring? And what are the Arab Gulf states lying and censoring?
Cases with the Gaza war, they have published completely fabricated stories. They claimed shortly after October 7th, they ran like a 4 or 5 minute segment about how the photo of a baby that had been killed on October 7th was actually AI, and it was in fact a picture of a dog. This is absolutely false. And in fact, other independent AI experts examined the photos and determined, from France, I believe they were, and determined that the photo Al Jazeera used was AI itself, the photo of the dog, not the reverse. But to cast doubt on this and to make the focus, is it AI or is it not AI, instead of Hamas just killed babies? Like, that's what the Islamic Republic does well. Instead of the fact that we just murdered 40,000 protesters in the streets, let's talk about the fact that 100 people died in airstrikes on Minab. Oh, they're bombing a school. Look how evil they are. Never mind the fact that the Islamic Republic forces have been taking over schools and mosques for months now, but in particular in the last 2 weeks as their base of operations. Never mind the fact that they've taken over hospitals during the protests, A, to kill protesters, but B, to keep doctors and nurses from providing treatment to those in need. So we never talk about that. No, let's look over here at some minute mistake that was made by the West, because we don't want to talk about what the actual issue is, which is the awful oppression of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
As far as the West goes, what you've been saying makes me think of what you call here the concepcia, how people thought about containment in Gaza before October 7th. You're making me think that how people have been thinking in the West about containment with Iran has that same sort of flavor.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought it was misguided with Gaza, and I think it's misguided with the Islamic Republic as well. How long are we going to do the same thing and expect different results? The Islamic Republic, as I explained before, can't really be reformed. Negotiations are not something that we can rely on. They're not motivated by the same things. They're not going to be, despite the fact that they will lie to your face and tell you they are. And that makes it difficult, I think, from the Western perspective to understand, because, look, they're saying they want to negotiate, right? No, this is a tactic that they've used for decades to buy time or to receive some sort of small concession, perhaps sanctions relief.
So underneath my disinterested scholarly core beats the heart of a confirmed tribalist, and this lady articulates everything that I feel about this war and the wider context. So if you watch just one TV show this year, watch The Madison, starring Michelle Pfeiffer. It's the latest, greatest TV series from Taylor Sheridan. Wonderful, wonderful show, The Madison. Check it out. Talk to you later, mate. Bye-bye.